Tonight we are looking into the topics you guys requested. That is, first up, Dinos and Dragons. We'll be getting to Cavemen, we'll be getting to evolution later on in the night, but this is what we're covering first.
Cool.
From your own mouth, here's what you said about Dinos and Dragons.
You mean from our own fingers?
Or sorry, this is just dinosaurs first. They died from an asteroid. They evolved into birds and flew off into the sunset. They are not alive anymore, but there are still some alive, like lizards.
I love that lizard.
It's a good lizard. And also, they're a big fat lizard.
Who said that?
Lizard!
What about they'll eat you? Because I could.
Yes.
Oh, hey, did you know that?
Definitely you was put by like 8 or 9 of you.
Some
It felt a little repetitive. Yes, you definitely thought they were being so cute. Which is funny if you think about it, because
Daniel.
scientists tell us that dinosaurs and humans never coexisted on the planet at the same time.
Then how do we know what
So
they
how
sound
can
like?
they eat you?
I have a
So how
question.
can they eat
I have a question.
And then,
I have a question.
crossover question. What have you guys heard about dragons? And you guys said you heard the dragons never existed. You heard they breathe fire and they will kill you. They like gold and they have wings and they breathe fire. And they are not alive, but they used to be alive.
They're alive.
I saw one
Alright,
in the
so
sky today.
just between these two, do you guys, can you think of anything that's like really obviously missing?
Oh my
Obviously-
goodness! Oh my
Obviously,
goodness!
the eat you was missing off the first one. What else?
They're thick.
They're thick? Are all of them thick? Or only like certain ones?
Every single Jurassic period.
Oh, you know, weird factoid. If you start looking into dinosaurs, you'll find the classifications have been so boiled down now, so like isolated, that pterosaurs don't even count anymore.
What's a
As it's like a pterodactyl, it's the group of things that pterodactyls are inside of.
Why?
They don't count anymore as dinosaurs.
Why?
That literally dinosaurs and pterosaurs are like two different groups now.
Big bird.
So like, if someone asks
Big
what's your favorite
brain.
dinosaur, you can't say pterodactyl because like
Oh.
it's not a dinosaur anymore. It's kind of like a Pluto. A little bit. Yeah.
Velociraptor.
Oh my
Not
Pluto.
Pluto.
I don't care if Pluto's not a planet. Pluto's still my favorite planet.
Right?
You have a name tag on
Not all dinosaurs are big. Some are like this big.
Oh yeah, no. Average dinosaur was the size of an American bison. That is the average size.
Drop it. The loud
That's
noise.
the average size. So yeah, there's bigger ones, but there was enough smaller ones to skew the average down to bison size. Anything else missing from our dinosaurs facts? Oh yeah, if you're done with the Kahoot, because that's done.
I think that microphone. I think that microphone.
Dang, someone make a loud microphone. Someone make a loud noise in the microphone. Let's make a good point.
I left this one on in case you guys got rowdy. I could grab it.
Oh, but if we get rowdy, it's just gonna make
Scream in
feedback.
it!
Ah!
I can't do it wrong.
Ah!
But I
I think your microphone's
Hey guys, can you
broken.
please rethink your current like motivation? Because it's the worst.
Oh, wait, time out. I think it's amazing.
What else is missing off the dragon slide? What did you guys miss here? What else is there that everyone knows about dragons?
Oh
That we're
my
not
goodness!
saying?
Oh
Yeah.
my. Well, everybody should know about that. They don't all.
They don't all breathe fire. Okay, good. What were you gonna say? You can train them.
How to train your
Oh my
dragon.
goodness!
I train your dragon in a nutshell.
I debated a little bit about the video we're gonna watch.
Oh,
Whether I should start it with just like how to train your dragons.
Wait,
And then
wait,
like it just hard cuts the other
wait,
video.
what was it
Just to
like?
mess with you guys. Yeah.
And I quote Nate, they're like a big chicken.
They're like a big chicken.
A huge
I think that's in Jurassic Park. Someone says it's just an overgrown chicken. The other one's like, well, I wouldn't want to be trapped in a cage with that chicken.
Oh, yeah.
Something like that.
Oh yeah, the
I think that's in
arcade
your
game.
Jurassic Park.
One of them in a cage.
They can have multiple heads.
Multiple headedness.
Like that one from like.
I've heard that runs in
Like
some
that-
families.
He'll head ya.
Yeah. That like.
Or, well, it just depends on which dragon mythology you're following. Okay, anything else for dragons?
It's not good.
No? Yes?
Oh my.
Never says they can fly.
It never says they can fly. Wings, but yeah, you're right, it doesn't say they can fly.
It never says they're big lizards.
Alright, so.
You're trash. Crushing piano.
A few things to think about, guys. Either the Bible's right about what it says historically, or maybe life on Earth started by accident millions of years ago, and dinosaurs lived long before humans did, and people evolved from ancient cave-like ancestors. This is kind of why we've coupled together all the different topics we're doing tonight. Why dinosaurs, dragons, cavemen, and evolution all ended up on the same night. Because they all have something in the classic thinking about dinosaurs, the classic thinking about dragons, the classic thinking about cavemen, the classic thing about evolution. Each one of those, the classic notion about them contradicts what the Bible says. So if we don't untangle those knots, if we don't figure out, is the classic thinking right or wrong? Is it only partly right? If we don't untangle that, then the Bible stands
Is that a donut?
in opposition to those things. Suddenly, dinosaurs in the Bible fight against each other. Suddenly, I kid you not, even dragons in the Bible fight against each other.
Really?
Suddenly, cavemen in the Bible fight against each other. And clearly, evolution in the Bible can fight against each other. But if you start to untangle those knots, you start to understand each of those four things we're picking on tonight, you'll see they actually fit in really well with the Bible once you really understand them. So that's why we're looking at all these tonight. So what does the Bible actually say? Well, on these particular topics, the Bible doesn't say like a ton about dinosaurs or even that much about dragons, but it does say some things that apply to all animals, and it does bring up dinosaurs once in a while, and even dragons. So here we go. Someone want to read us Genesis 1, 24 through 25. Oh, my paragraphs are leaked onto the wrong column. It's ugly. Okay, anybody? Yes, go ahead. Read that first paragraph for me.
Then God said, "Let the earth bring forth the living creatures according to its kind, cattle and creeping thing, and beast of the earth, each according to its kind. And it was so. And God made the beast of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything that creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good."
So when you go back and you look at these words in the Hebrew, he's trying, in their version of science, because it's thousands of years old, he's trying to encompass every type of animal. And, you know, their version of science was pretty
Beast
bad.
of the earth.
So when he lists these things, he's listing the big categories. When he says cattle, he's not talking like cows specifically.
Why
He's talking
not?
about any herd animal, just anything that goes in a
So
herd.
dinosaurs?
So that's like a really big category when you start to think about how many animals live in herds.
Humans.
Not just domesticated animals, but like
Humans.
natural herds. Lots of animals naturally live in a herd. That's a rather broad category, and same with the other ones. When he says creeps, he's not talking like only insects but not arachnids, or only lizards but not amphibians. Like, it's
Why?
a really broad category because thousands of years ago we hadn't invented words like reptile or
Dinosaur.
cow.
Or
These are
pickles.
modern words. No, seriously. We invented these words. When you go back into the Bible and they're talking in ancient Hebrew, when they say stuff like cattle, they could mean goats. They could mean sheep. It's totally up for context to decide.
They had the word dog.
Could it mean cow?
They did have the word dog, yes. But it wasn't a specific word that excluded wolves and
Wolf.
jackals and other
Wolf.
things.
Wolf.
It really was canine, basically.
What's a canine?
It's
What's
like
a
all the
canine?
things
It's
like
a
wolf and
dog.
fox and dog. Or fox isn't.
Fox
Indian,
is
like
cat.
Fox is vulpine.
I have
Okay, anyways. So that's
do not
Genesis.
care.
First off, the Bible goes on record and says God made all the land animals. So, if dinosaurs are real, and I firmly believe they are, that means God made them according to God. He's claiming he made them. Okay? Then we move on to Genesis chapter 7. Someone want to read Genesis chapter 7?
No.
Maya, go ahead. And it starts down there where it says for 40 days because my font got messed up.
For 40 days, the floodwaters grew deeper, covering the ground and lifting the boat higher above the earth. As the waters rose higher and higher above the ground, the boat floated safely on the surface. Finally, the water covered even the highest mountains on earth, rising more than 22 feet above the highest peaks. All the living things on earth died: birds, domestic animals, wild animals, small animals that scurry along the ground, and all people.
So again, they're using really big, broad categories here at the end, and what they're trying to do in their ancient Hebrew is say stuff that isn't a fish.
Everything
Now, they
died.
could have just said stuff that isn't a fish, but they were trying to include, not exclude.
Alligators.
So essentially, this is everything that needs to be on land to live. Now, there are actually some birds that cannot, but even those birds would probably not fare very well in a global flood. Like even ducks and stuff probably wouldn't do so hot during a global flood.
But
Sorry?
literally,
Same kind of deal. It's It's more about what would the surface of the water look like during the golden flood.
Oh, I know what it would look like.
Does that make sense? Like, what would the air be like during
I know
the
what
golden
it
flood?
would be like.
So I think most birds are firmly in the category of I want to be under that roof.
Weston.
And very, very few birds are going to just be like left out in the ocean like, you'll be fine. So I think most birds got tucked in there pretty safe and sound. It's pretty much just sea creatures. Now that said, when you check the fossil record, you'll find a lot of sea creatures died in the flood. It was not safe by any means just to be a fish. It's not like the waters just come up and you're like, sweet, free real estate. That's not what it would be like as a fish. We're talking about huge segments of land just picking up and floating through the ocean. So if you can imagine just like swimming along as a fish one day, and suddenly like the subcontinent of India just like punches you in the face, it would pretty much suck to be a fish. Even, you know, though you can swim, you're still gonna get buried under all the stuff that isn't usually in the ocean. So it would have been rough to be a fish. Even though there's no like ark to save you, some will make it, but not that much. It's gonna be
You guys are
hard.
disgusting.
Thank you. Lots of debris and dirt and rocks. It's gonna be bad. No, debris is actually good though when it's all said and done. When the tumultuous, crazy, bad, rough waters subside, then debris from like plants, you know, trees and stuff floating on the top, that provides like a life raft for anything that barely made it through. So at that point, as soon as the actual stormy part of the storm dies down, even while the earth is still flooded, seagulls and whatever else maybe just barely made it, they can go land on some log somewhere and just take a load off. So that'd be pretty cool. All right, then we get all the way into the New Testament for 2 Peter. Anyone want to read 2 Peter? Lulu?
Does it start?
It starts most importantly, and then jumps up to the next side.
Most importantly, I want to remind you that in the last days, scoffers will come mocking the truth and following their own desires. They will say, what happened to the promise that Jesus is coming again? From before the times of our ancestors, everything has remained the same since the world was first created.
Yeah. So this is what it says in the Bible back during like, you know, 60-ish AD about the future. It says people are going to say Jesus is slow to come back. He's probably never coming back. Was it real anyways?
Yes.
You get into Romans where Paul's writing in chapter 1, he says stuff like, eventually people are just going to give up on worshiping things greater than them that create things, and they're going to actually worship the things that were created. They're going to worship nature. They're going to worship the stuff that's inside the universe rather than the one who made the universe. And I think it's interesting that it took us this long. Most religions don't do that. If you go back to any old religion that was around in their day, they were worshiping a god of some kind. And Paul says someday that won't be the case. It won't be a creator that they worship. It will be the universe, the creation itself. And now that's where we live. This is the time we live in. By and large, people are looking to creation. They're looking to nature as the thing that created them. They're calling the creation the creator. And oddly, they're worshiping it. It's very strange. Okay, I gotta prep you guys. Once upon a time in 2017, Weston was there, he'll remember.
Wait, what?
We did a 4-week Bible study called Dinos, Dragons,
I
and
remember
Donuts.
that.
Oh,
yeah.
I was there. I was there.
No, you weren't.
I was.
Actually, Hunter might have been.
Boomer.
I was.
I was.
He's like, I need.
I was.
I don't even know what 2017 is.
Because I was sick.
Of
We
course
were
you
not in
were.
middle school in
Yeah, both of our
2017.
parents.
Bro, I've always been sick.
I was there.
Oh, I love
Remember
dinosaurs.
Really?
How's that?
Wait,
Hunter was.
My brain works. I got 2 hours of sleep last night.
Because we don't usually let it in 5th grade.
I remember that.
Okay.
Wait, but then he would be a fifth grader.
He was in the high school group because his parents were basically running the high school group at that point.
Yeah.
So and we did it as
Yeah,
a
me.
crossover
Me.
middle school,
That
high
is
school
so
event.
not fair.
And so he came up with the high school.
Me too. Me too. Me
Yeah,
too.
I did it.
Okay, anyway.
So I
me
got
too.
free donuts, pretty
So
much.
here's
Yeah,
the
me
point.
too. Me too. Me too. Me too.
We did a 4-week study. Every week we watched a 20-minute video, and then we talked about it for like an hour.
Oh yeah, my brother's.
They were epically cool videos. They had pounds of science in them.
I remember
I
that.
wanted to take forever and like edit you guys down a miniature version of the video, but there's basically no way to like capture all that goodness and cram it into a shorter form factor. So what I did is I picked out just the 10-minute portion of week 2 that does both dinosaurs and dragons. Most of the videos are just about dinosaurs. There's very little about dragons. So just one little portion of week 2 was about dragons. So I'm going to play that part for you guys. If you want to see all of them, I stuck them up on a private YouTube playlist. You can go find it at ccchico.com/dinos.
That's not that private.
You'd
It's
have
not
to guess
private
that out of
now.
the
I can
millions of
remember.
possible words.
I'm
Okay.
starting to remember.
So,
the
anyways,
country.
you won't find it by
Yeah,
searching.
I'm
That's the point. You won't find it by searching.
Yeah, so am I.
But if you type that in,
I know.
it'll jump you straight to the YouTube playlist. If you want to watch all 4 weeks, you
Such a
can.
good video.
Like I said, it's 4 20-minute videos. It's like 4 cartoons or whatever. So we're just gonna watch part of one tonight. But this is the
80
part
minutes
about
long.
dinos and dragons.
Can you
Matt.
turn off the
All right.
stage lights?
No, stage lights stay.
I can't see.
No.
I'm
How about
scared.
we do this? How we go down with the stage?
No, all the way.
Everything on.
No,
Is it
like
bad?
that, like that, like
Every
that.
single thing on.
Thank you.
That is
Is that-
Oh, I'm not
marvelous.
scared of the dark.
Yes, there's a
That
big
is-
difference.
There's a giant difference.
All right, here we go. You guys ready?
One's on and one's off.
Is it scary? Because I'm scared it's scary.
Across generations and across cultures, over centuries and centuries, we've told and retold stories full of strange and wonderful beasts. But are these only stories? Were the creatures once real? What happened to them? Can science tell us if these legends aren't legends at all? Can the Bible help us decide what's fact and what's fiction, what's dinosaur and dragon? In this series, we'll look to both science and the Bible to help bring dinosaurs back to life and to find the answers to the questions they have left us. Uncovering the truth about dinosaurs. Dinosaurs and dragons. We know that civilizations around the world have tales of mythical creatures. But why are legends so full of monsters and dragons? Are these just ways we deal with fear and uncertainty? Are they the faces we put on the unknown? What if these stories were accounts of things our forefathers actually saw? I'm Marcus Lloyd, and today we're going to look for evidence that these were dinosaurs from a not too distant past. Even today we hear stories of strange creatures like the Loch Ness Monster in Scotland. The Aboriginals of the Australian outback spoke of a T-Rex-like creature killing cattle. A Triceratops-type beast has allegedly been seen in the Congo. And from New Guinea come stories of pterosaurs, flying reptiles. All these reports have come within the last 50 years. Is it only our active imaginations? Or could these sightings be credible? Why isn't there more proof? Why can't somebody catch one of these creatures? Well, they have. In 1938, fishermen off the coast of South Africa caught a weird specimen. It's a coelacanth. Scientists thought it had gone extinct before the dinosaurs. That's because researchers discovered its fossils in rock layers far beneath dinosaur bones. The discovery of this so-called living fossil shocked the secular scientific community. Within the last few decades, there have been other finds. A beetle and a grove of pine trees among them, living remnants of species supposedly extinct for hundreds of millions of years. But creation scientists aren't surprised to find them still with us. They only had to survive a few thousand years, not millions. The idea is not a stretch if you consider that supposedly extinct specimens have been found in remote and relatively unexplored places like the ocean depths. Creation scientists have always believed that dinosaurs were created by God and lived at the same time as humans. The Bible and evidence from geology and paleontology, from biology and archaeology, and of course from history confirm this. Let's see if we can find evidence to support the biblical account. First, we'll check out some archaeological artifacts. Then we'll look into the many legends about dragon-like creatures. Finally, we'll examine the evidence from the Bible itself. Let's start in the American Southwest. Natural Bridges National Monument in Utah is a rugged landscape where water has eroded sandstone into beautiful shapes. Under the Kachina Bridge, there is unusual rock art carved by the Native Americans who lived there from around 150 BC to 1200 AD.
One of the carvings looks just like a sauropod dinosaur. Some people say that this sauropod look-alike is made of stains from water runoff. But there's no stain, there's no water runoff onto this petroglyph. And if you look closely at it, you notice the peck marks are there, not stains, it's peck marks. So the whole dinosaur look-alike is made of these peckings, and that's what makes it look genuine to us. We have a mystery here, and the mystery is, how did they make a picture of something that looks so exactly like a sauropod dinosaur? So many years before paleontology started to even uncover sauropods from the ground.
You have artwork that depicts what could be dinosaurs in many different cultures around the world that are separated by language, separated by geography, and separated by time.
On the banks of a river near the border of Mexico and Guatemala, there's a carving made by Mayans somewhere between 250 AD and 900 AD, and it closely resembles a hadrosaur, more specifically, a Hypacrosaurus. And not too far from there, ancient murals show figures wearing headdresses decorated with creatures like jaguars and fish, and one of the designs actually looks like a Deinonychus, one of the theropods. Artifacts like pottery and textiles from pre-Columbian culture in Peru also depict dinosaurs. These startling images are not confined to just the Americas. Let's head over to Asia.
La Hongshan is a Paleolithic culture. It's one of the first people groups to arrive in what we today call China. And they're characterized by their very elaborate carvings in valuable stone, like jade. They have jade dragons, that's sort of the icon of Hongshan culture. And in bloodstone and in turquoise, they have carvings that look, I mean, for all practical purposes, like a dinosaur.
The Hongshan sculptors have made images of jade that do look just like pigs. So when they wanted to make something that looked like a pig, they were quite capable of it. But when they made other creatures that look like the cousin of a triceratops, why should we doubt that someone was relating to the artist what, in his memory, a dragon, if you will, looked like?
We have a Stegosaurus look-alike in Ta Prohm. That's an ancient temple in what we call today Cambodia. But the Khmer people built this temple in the 12th century AD. And it's got carvings, bas-reliefs on columns in this stone temple of familiar animals like a water buffalo and a parrot and a monkey and a Stegosaurus. How did it get there so long before paleontology discovered the first Stegosaurus? Unless the people interacted with a live Stegosaurus. That's a possibility we should consider and not just dismiss.
There are also plenty of dragons in the lore of Europe in the Middle Ages. Most of us think of them as mythical creatures and fairy tales we tell our children. You probably remember the story of the brave knight St. George slaying the dragon. The legend is full of symbolic meaning, but there's truth in it. St. George was a real historical figure who was canonized by the Pope in 494 AD. He's revered by Christians in the Eastern Orthodox Church. By the 16th century, there were thousands of reported encounters with dragons and other terrifying beasts.
In Carlisle Cathedral in England, there is a Bishop Bell who is buried in the late 1400s, only a few short years after Christopher Columbus went from the Eastern Hemisphere to the Western Hemisphere. So this is the beginning of the Age of Exploration. And yet during that time, when he was buried, brass ornamental carvings were put at his burial place, and in that carved brass, we see what look like sauropods. They have the long extended tail, they have the long thin neck and small head, and their legs are sticking down from their body, not splayed out like a lizard.
In one French castle, there's a tapestry with a swamp scene, and there's a reptile depicted in this tapestry, and it looks like a Maiasaura.
In the Middle Ages, an Italian naturalist, Ulisse Aldrovandi, included fantastic dragons in his zoological treatises. Did he just dream up these creatures? Why would he illustrate so many of them with real animals of the day? You'd also find accounts of dinosaur-like beasts in the works of Marco Polo, the famous 13th century explorer. He described serpents with mouths large enough to swallow a man. Alexander the Great wrote of encountering strange monsters. And St. John of Damascus, an early Christian, spoke of a dragon 120 feet in length, killed by the Roman army. And even before that, there were Greek and Roman historians.
Winged serpents are written about by many of the old historians, the Roman historians, the Greek historians. An example of a Roman historian would be Cicero. Herodotus was writing 400 plus years before Christ.
When I arrived there, I saw bones and spines of serpents in such quantities as it would be impossible to describe. The form of the serpent is like that of the water snake, but he has wings without feathers, and is like as possible to the wings of a bat.
Philostratus was a Greek philosopher who lived in the 2nd and 3rd centuries AD, and he gave very detailed descriptions of dragons in India. And he talked about what they looked like, how big they were, their color, how they behaved. So we have lots of ancient historians describing these creatures and giving us very detailed descriptions of what these animals were like.
And there's the giant beast behemoth found in the book of Job. The Bible reads, "Look now at the behemoth, which I made along with you. He eats grass like an ox. See, now his strength is in his hips, and his power is in his stomach muscles. He moves his tail like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are tightly knit. His bones are like beams of bronze, his ribs like bars of iron."
So to understand the context of what the behemoth and leviathan are, what we have to understand is that prior to their description in the book of Job, God is already describing to Job a bunch of very real animals that Job knows and is familiar with. And that pattern continues. There's no break, there's no statement where all of a sudden God says, now I'm describing mythology.
This fits the idea that Job was alive after the flood when sauropods were still alive. They've since gone extinct. But was Job looking at one when God described it? He said, "Behold now behemoth, which I made along with you," i.e., on day 6 of creation week, God made man and animals, including dinosaurs.
What can we glean from the world around us and the animals by us versus maybe something in the fossil record? Well, one of the features that God describes to Job about the behemoth is the tail. And the tail is described as something that sways like a cedar tree. Now, this is a femur bone of a small herbivorous dinosaur. And so this animal has a muscle that connects from the leg bone out to the tail. Now, dinosaurs held their tails out straight. So if we think about where this animal is, we've got the hips here, the leg moving forward and back, and the tail extending out behind it. This muscle grabs onto the tail so that every time the leg moves forward, the tail pulls in to the side of that leg. And every time the leg moves back and the other leg on the other side moves forward, it pulls the tail the opposite direction. So as a dinosaur is walking, moving its legs back and forth, the muscles of those legs are connecting to the tail, causing the tail to sway back and forth, moving gently like a tree in the wind.
No, that's where we'll stop for tonight.
That's a huge.
Wait, are we gonna watch another one?
I'm
a
no more videos.
Wait,
I meant to say that's a 86.
That particular series. There'll be more videos.
I remember this.
All right, so lot to unpack there. Basic idea is this: there is mythology. Mythology is definitely myth, and stories grow. But the thought that the Bible says all the animals were put on the ark, the thought that the Bible says God made every animal, tells us that if there's something we dig up, something that we find extinct and we find fossils of it, that means it's included in those all statements. God isn't saying I made everything except. So if he says all, he means all. Therefore, when he says I made all the land animals, he made all the dinosaurs. When he says I put 2 of every kind of animal on the ark, there's really only 2 possibilities there. Either dinosaurs already went extinct, which makes basically no sense. I don't know why they would have. There's no extinction event talked about between Adam at the beginning of creation and then Noah a few thousand years later. So what could possibly have done that? I don't know. But he says I put 2 of everything on the ark, so I have to believe him when he says that. He put 2 of everything on the ark. Now, would he stick 2 adult brontosauruses on the ark, or would he stick like 2
eggs,
juvenile, or maybe 2 eggs,
giant
brontosaurus on the ark? I would go with the little guy. That's just me. Like, you spent all that time making your giant wooden boat. I don't want to stick something on the boat that can like pick up its head in the morning and poke it out the side of the boat. That's not a great idea. So like, if I were Noah or God, I would be sending the little brontosaurus, the baby brontosaurus, onto the boat. That would be my pick.
What about the 2 rats?
Something that's just a few years away from being able to have babies and no further down the age line. Yeah, Sonia.
So, like 2 of every single kind of dinosaur? Like every kind?
Well, it's not just dinosaurs. I mean, think about how many other animal groups there are.
But I know, like all of the animals, but like there's so many kinds of dinosaurs.
Oh yeah. Well, and like I said, you can take smaller ones. You don't have to take them when they're big. But then the ark, we've walked it out before. It is, according to the Bible's measurements, long enough to reach all the way from the street, straight down the side of our building, straight past, all the way to the back fence, and wider than our building by 50%. So from this side, straight through that wall out the door, straight through the main sanctuary, and then another 50% past for width. So the ark is incredibly massive. One of the largest wooden boats ever conceived of.
Even if they were small babies, there were a lot.
Yes, definitely a lot of them. Then you get past the ark, everything comes off the ark, everything tries to reestablish itself, and that's where things get pretty interesting. What were you going to say, Abby?
Was the baby like as big as a dinosaur? No, like as big as an elephant?
No, they were born in normal-sized eggs. Their eggs were like no bigger than this. So like they had to pass through every size in between to get to that big. So if you just pick one that's the right age, you can basically have them any size you want. Does that make sense?
Seems like their eggs would be like this big.
I know, because like ostrich eggs are bigger than chicken eggs, but apparently there is a limit on how big of an egg you can make. Because an egg starts out as a singular cell. That's what the egg is. It's one cell. And so there's apparently an upper limit on what you can do with one giant cell before it's just too big. Okay. So here's a few things we see in the evidence. Dinosaurs display a variety of traits. They all share distinct features that differentiate them from all the other animal kinds. So there's really no evidence of evolution between kinds. Even if you compare lizards, which I think multiple of you guys said dinosaurs were the same as lizards.
No.
In the entrance poll, a few of you guys wrote something to that effect. If you compare dinosaurs and lizards, you'll find there's multiple differences down at the DNA level, up at the physiology level. They mentioned one in the video. Lizards do not pick up their bellies from the ground until it's time to move. At rest, a lizard has its limbs out to the side and lets its belly touch the ground. And then when it's time to move, they pick up their belly, but not all at once. It's not like they stand up and then walk. They actually are picking up their belly in turn with every step. Their belly leaves the ground. So their entire belly and chest is kind of rippling across the ground as they walk. Dinosaurs did not do that. They had hip bones, legs that shot straight down. They look much more like elephants in like the way their skeleton works. And that separates them in a pretty big way from lizards. We don't have any lizards that do this. The closest thing we have are lizards that will do this. They'll stick a limb out straight and then the other half goes down straight. That's the closest thing we have. There are no lizards that literally have their hips pointing downward though. That's a distinct dinosaur trait. That's also why I was saying earlier like sauropods don't count as dinosaurs. There's a big long list of what makes a dinosaur a dinosaur. All dinosaur body parts are in place with no credible evidence of evolutionary tinkering. That means you can go back to the deepest layer of fossils, find the oldest fossil of a dinosaur you possibly can, and you'll still find no transitional form. It's still 100% dinosaur. It ticks every box. We don't have any dinosaurs that are like 99% dinosaur, 1% tiny lizard. We don't have that. We don't have any dinosaurs that are like mostly dinosaur except for one thing. We don't have that. All the way down to the deepest fossil layer, what you find is as soon as there's any dinosaurs, there's not just multiple kinds of dinosaurs all of a sudden, but there's the whole dinosaur ecosystem. The whole dinosaur ecosystem. All the plants that are buried with them are diverse. All the animals that move alongside of them, because they weren't the only animals alive when they were alive, they're all buried right along with them. There's no progression in the fossil record. A lot of places where they are buried are now dry. They're deserts or arid, and they were once tropical wetlands. You can tell from the kinds of plants. You can tell from the soil type that they're buried in. And the fossils tell us that much of the world had a warmer climate in the past. Essentially what you find when you dig up the fossils, you get to see how much wetland was there, how much desert was there, how much whatever was there back in time. And when you look back in time to those soil layers that contain dinosaurs, you see most of the planet was like wetland. That was most of the planet. Dinosaur fossils buried in sediment layers, and they confirm the Bible's description of a global flood. So this goes back to how do you make a fossil? Does anyone know how you make a fossil?
Yeah, you bury it in the earth for thousands of years.
How do you make a fossil?
Basically, something dies and
It doesn't have to be something dies.
No, it doesn't.
Always.
She's got a point.
He's just upset that he's wrong.
What were you going to say, Jonathan? Go ahead and finish.
Anyway, so then it has to be buried under multiple layers of dirt or stones
Okay.
And then it has to solidify, and all of the bones and material of the dinosaur or animal would be turned into minerals.
Okay. So why doesn't that happen with every single thing that gets buried?
Or like blobfish.
Like humans. You go to a graveyard that's been there in Europe for 1,000 years. Why don't you dig up fossilized human bones in a human graveyard? Why isn't it that every single thing that gets buried doesn't just turn immediately into a fossil or slowly into a fossil? Why is it only certain things? Yeah, Danielle?
Is it because it has to be in a certain area? Doesn't it have to have water? That's like compressing it down?
Yes. Now we're getting somewhere.
Because like a lot of the time you find fossils in areas that there used to be like a big river or even like just like a little river.
So water helps. Water is not the key ingredient, but it's the catalyst. Wow, everyone had to pee all at once. It's amazing.
I got
It's a rush.
There was
a flood to the
There was
bathroom.
2 high school girls walking up, and they
Hey, don't you
as
dare
soon as
snitch
they
on my
get
cousin.
They probably thought there was no one upstairs. Because most Fridays there's no one upstairs. All right. There's a few conditions you need to make a fossil. First off, you need a total burial. You need high pressure, and you don't want a ton of bacteria. Now, normally when something gets buried, like average burial, in the wild, it's slow. Most animals that die in the wild, their bacterial decay, their carrion bird picking them over, that all happens above ground. And them getting buried isn't like we bury people, where you go over with a shovel and just like throw dirt on top. That doesn't happen to wild animals when they die. Naturally, they just lie on the ground, and they will deteriorate and disintegrate just lying on top of the ground.
Yay.
So first off, you need an instantaneous burial. You need, if you want a whole body fossil, you need the whole body buried all at once. So that presents some problems. That doesn't happen naturally all the time. Most things that die do not keel over in a pit and then a landslide just like mysteriously rushes over them and buries that body. That doesn't happen most of the time. And then on top of that, you need pressure to get the mineralization to actually occur. And again, if you're only buried under like a little bit of dirt or like a normal amount of dirt, there's not that much pressure. Like, granted, dirt's heavy, but like you need a lot of pressure to kick that off. You also need a pretty good airtight seal. And that's why water can be such a good catalyst. If there's a lot of moisture in the soil, then there's no way for the air to move around in the soil, so then you're airlocked right there where you're buried. So what that means is, under most conditions, you won't get a fossil at all, ever. But when there's a giant flood, you've got the perfect conditions for a fossil happening wherever the flood happens. You're moving huge amounts of dirt in that flood. The water gets all muddy and silty, and then when the floodwaters recede, when they start to wash out to sea and they start to lower down, then all that silt and dirt gets trapped and immediately buries whatever was down at the bottom of the flood. So in a flood situation, suddenly a ton of fossils can form, whereas normally not that many, they're really rare. So this is why creation scientists lean so heavily on the flood, because to get dinosaur bones, to get extinct species bones scattered all over the planet, you would need a flood that was all over the planet. That's what you would end up needing. Otherwise, there's no good explanation for it. Because if you go somewhere like the Grand Canyon, you're walking with your tour guide, and they show you, there's that layer, there's that layer, there's that layer, and you go up, and you can look at them, like this one's 3 feet thick, and that one's 10 feet thick, and they say, see how this one's thinner than that one? This one represents less time than that one represents. Well, there's a problem with that. What about the dinosaur that's buried, and it's this tall? If the layer represents time, and the dinosaur is this tall, that means the bottom of the dinosaur would be buried over the first 1,000 years, and the next inch of the dinosaur would be buried over the next 1,000 years, and the next inch of the dinosaur would be buried over the next 1,000 years. And eventually, you go all the way up, and you could finally bury the whole dinosaur. But the problem is, that bottom inch, A, wouldn't get fossilized, because there's no pressure on top of it. And then B, all the top inches, they'd be gone before they ever got buried. They would deteriorate, they would decay. Bones don't magically last for thousands of years.
I think my bones do.
So they would be gone. To get a dinosaur that's, chest cavities this tall, or a giant T-Rex, the skull of a T-Rex, you would need the whole thing to get buried, however tall that thing is, all at once. Or it's not happening. You're not getting a fossil. No fossil. It can be buried, that'll work just fine, but it will not turn into a fossil. So to look at a layer of soil and go, see how thick it is, that's how much time it took for it to accrue. And then find a fossil in that layer should make every paleontologist, every geologist go, oh, guess I was wrong. I guess that layer happened all at once. But that's not typically what happens. Sonia.
How long does a person have to be dead before it's considered archaeology?
That's a great question. I don't know. That's a little head scratcher right there. I don't know. Yeah, where does it cross from grave robbing to archaeology? What's the tipping point?
Grave robbing. Like 1,000 years.
Where do you go?
At least.
I'm gonna go like 500 years minimum. Minimum. Maybe it's more. I feel like 500 years minimum.
Daniel, he has the answer.
If you can still read the gravestone and it's above ground, like it's too soon.
Too soon? Okay.
Too soon.
Daniel,
Yeah,
he
what
has,
else?
I also had another question.
Yeah.
You know how Sid the Sloth is like almost as tall as Manny?
I hadn't thought about it, but okay.
Manny was the
He's a
first
giant
one to
sloth.
rock
Yes.
He's like
I believe that was their intent. I think that's a weird question, but I think you're right. I think he's meant to be a giant sloth.
Yes, the answer.
He looks more like a giant sloth than he does like a modern day sloth. That's for darn sure. Yeah.
So it has to be like 500 years. You know, that's all well and good. But if you find something in a glacier,
yes,
it's still technically not decomposed.
Sure.
Then it's fossilized.
So what is that then? Is that archaeology or?
Or grave robbing.
It's just yoinking animals out of ice.
I don't know. I think that's called getting ready for dinner, right? Because you just take things out to defrost. That's just dinner prep.
So is a baby mammoth going to be a specialty soon?
I certainly hope so. I want to see it happen. People have talked about it. Getting the DNA out of frozen mammoths, crossbreeding with an elephant, man. I want to see a mammoth at the zoo. I want to see it happen.
Why? No.
Way more than I want to see dinosaurs come back. Because like I know where I stand with a mammoth. I've seen us train elephants. But I've seen too much of Jurassic Park to ever think that would be a good idea. Yeah.
Can we get over with this?
Yes, we could.
This and just go
Landon, you make it worse
Thank you,
when you
Landon.
say that stuff.
All right.
come
Last few
on.
things. They mentioned them in there, but I just want to bring them up again. The Bible and evidence from geology, paleontology, biology, archaeology, and history all confirm that dinosaurs lived at the same time
2.5
as
hours.
humans. Now this fights the normal trend. The normal trend is to say the Earth is millions and millions and millions of years old, that dinosaurs existed long before mankind existed, but there are huge problems with those statements. Huge problems. It's in the archaeology. You'll find footprints in the same layers you can find human remains. It's in our history. You find accounts of people coming across dragon-like or dinosaur-like creatures. They don't all say they breathe fire. They don't all say they had wings. But you know what? We have sauropods. We know there were reptiles that could fly. Like, that is not a fanciful notion. We know that existed. So for someone to historically say, I saw a reptile fly, should not turn them into someone who's spouting myth automatically. We need more than that to determine if they're spouting myth or not. Yeah, Sonia.
Do you believe the dragons existed?
So when you say dragon, right, there's really two things you could mean
Big
there.
lizard with wings.
I think that existed. We dug them up. We found them. Big reptile with wings. It's called a sauropod.
No, but like
I'm the sauropod.
like dinosaur with wings. Like dinosaur with wings.
Do you mean like a certain shape? Are you going for a certain shape here?
Like fire, like in mythology.
No. So here's why. The number of drawings of a dinosaur in a dinosaur's own shape increases as you go backwards in time.
What about like Game of
If you get real close to now, no, not even close. No, not even a little bit. The closer you get to now, the more you get the fancy, crazy-looking dragons with like humongous bodies that are like meaty and strong, and they can like pounce like a lion, and they've got a neck that's like 50 feet long, but they can still move it like a quick little snake. Like,
I'm a snake.
there's nothing about that that makes any sense, and you only get those drawings in the more recent retellings of older fables. Does that make sense? You don't get them at the original point of the original story. So.
Do you think they had hordes of stuff?
No, I really don't think they had hordes of stuff. I don't think they could speak to you with their mind. I don't think they were hyper intelligent. That's in a lot of dragon tales, is that they can communicate in English but not in their mouth. They just
that is everywhere.
That's in a ton of dragon stories. I don't think any of that's real. No. Okay. We're almost done here, guys. Abby.
It's basically the same question, but like, do you believe like that actual dragons like breathe fire and like they're kind of like
Well, I don't know about the fire thing. I'm on the fence on fire.
There's no way.
Because I don't know what part of that was the made up part. Was it the whole thing, or was it the way they breathed fire? Did they
Maybe they
do
farted
things
fire.
that maybe made people start to spin that tail over time? Maybe. We have creatures that can do some pretty sweet stuff. We have creatures that can make light out of their body. We have creatures we have the creature like the bombardier beetle that can have like two chemicals both produced in the same body that when combined are explosive.
Really?
And yet that same creature can make both chemicals and knows how to keep them separate and then jettisons them at the same time so they mix in the air and explode outside of its body. Like that's pretty trick. So that's a bombardier beetle. Now obviously it's on a very small scale and that's one animal. There's like no other animal on the planet that we know that can do that.
What if we get like 1 million of them?
Like I said, I don't know if dragons
There's no way to tell.
could have ever breathed fire like they show in movies or talk about in books. But maybe there was some kind of dinosaur that had some kind of chemical thing that it could do with its mouth. And that freaked people out enough that the story started and then it kept spinning. And eventually that story becomes the story of fire-breathing dragons!
I am
So I don't know, I'm not going to rule out that one time there was a dinosaur that had something it could do heat-based with its mouth. I think that's within the realm of possibility. I don't know, I've never seen anyone draw up a good diagram of how a biological creature could breathe fire.
I know.
I've never seen one that was
I
convincing.
know why.
Daniel, I'm not really sold on that. Yeah.
People are like, that's fire.
So, it's not reality.
Okay.
But just imagine.
Just imaginary,
I know
sure.
how it happened.
Turn on the right side of your brain, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so if their tongue was flint and their teeth.
Right, imaginary, right,
Yes,
right. Okay.
right.
Yeah.
And their teeth were
Steel. Steel teeth, right?
What I said?
I've read that in Dragon Story, so, you know, that works.
Yes,
Daniel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Daniel. Think about New York Dolphin. That's all that
So do they just,
And you guys
they
are
just
all
have,
we're gonna
like,
get
a methane duct on, like, the side of their cheek
They
or something?
pour it out of their mouth.
That's what I'm getting at. It's a methane dispersal
They just bring out really hot air.
and then they just, like, flip their teeth.
Daniel!
That'd be amazing.
I need my donuts.
Oh, we're getting there.
Daniel, wait. Come on! I don't have presentation.
Yeah.
Maybe they farted fire. Because they're.
I feel like someone would have
Cows.
just plain told us that.
Their farts are so poisonous that it just like as soon as the heat from the sun just hit it, it just boom.
Self-ignition. Yes.
Oh yeah,
valid.
wait, I had 2.
You had 2?
Yes, I told you that. When are you gonna put it out the note?
Oh, we're doing it right now. We gotta play a game, and then we're gonna do it. Yes.
Let's go.
What if their teeth were just like could make sparks and they ate oil, but like they could.
We just literally talked about that.
No, you guys talked about farting out
Alright.
of mouth.
Wait, I didn't.
Whoa, I can't see.
Oh, right.
No, don't fix that.
Can I get Hannah or Emily or someone to come be Vanna White and take score for me?
I'll be Vanna White.
Me.
I'll take scores. Can I be Vanna White? Put your arm.
I think
All right, guys.
be a white van.
Listen up.
Hey,
Listen up.
stop it.
I'll continue this.
Okay, first things first.
The podium is ready.
That's right.
See podium.
I think Lulu won by default.
Oh my gosh.
Drum
Me, I won even though I didn't even play.
Oh come on!
What is this?
Dismiss.
Wait, Daniel, can I actually do a drum song?
Yes.
Ready?
Oh my
It
god.
literally doesn't matter unless you're first.
No!
They literally left us in his first.
Oh my god.
Third.
Whoa!
11.
Speed up the animation.
Cash.
Oh my gosh, I won. Even though I didn't even play.
Come on, animation, go faster!
Cash. But it was Lulu by
Cash
default.
monkey.
All right, now,
it wasn't.
quick
Because
question,
she
quick
also-
question.
Hey, look, I'm right there.
Quick question.
But we still like won by a
Cash,
block.
mine, and Lulu. How many of you guys received help while you were doing the quiz?
All of them?
Cash and Lulu.
All of them.
All 3
Yes, she
received
did.
help?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, let me see if I can figure out who's fourth.
What are we all? Wait, what are
You
they all?
guys, who've got help, you can totally still be winners. I'll just make you run around.
Everyone's a winner.
by themselves.
I didn't do it.
Daniel, I don't get help.
Hey Daniel! We should have a contest for those so long.
We're gonna play a game right now, and I need you guys into teams.
I'm allergic to games and I need
So let's do teams of. Let's make it go a little faster. Let's do teams of 6.
One up, teams of 6.
Six. I think that's 3 on 3.
I'm on this team.
Therefore, pineapples are not a fruit.
We have 6
There you go.
If you go back to see the podium, after it goes to the first place, it shows runners up. 4th and 5th. Yeah, at the bottom.
This is church.
No.
I'll really want you to say your
Women need.
You said that. We already there.
We already have 6.
What?
Huh?
I already have 6. 13. I'm 13. I know. Don't do it. You know what? Screw it. I'll be by myself.
Hey, you guys can join a team by force.
I'll just be by myself.
Do it again, I can't.
I'm a
Nope.
Usually it shows
No
runners
dice.
up on the bottom.
It's just a skip animation button. That's all it is.
Replaying animation.
Well, that doesn't help
No,
us.
you're
It's still
not.
gonna show the same 3 names.
I literally just punched
You only saw
You want to be a part of my team, my kid? I have Matt.
Alright guys, teams of 6, hurry up. Come off the seat.
I'm going solo.
Landon, you can join that team right there. They're there. They need someone.
You're out.
Landon! They need a player.
I knew I won.
We have 6.
We need a player. We need a player. 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 I'll literally accept anyone with a pulse.
Okay, well, I think our teams are all full then, so
How
it doesn't
about
matter.
Landon?
Landon, I think at this point it doesn't matter. You can join any team you want.
We
None of
wait,
them
they
joined
only
the
have
round.
5. They only have 5.
No, we don't.
Oh, there you go, Landon. They're down a player. They need you.
Brass monkey. Really, bro? Come on, you kids, man.
Yeah, just try to replay the animation.
Guys,
I'm not even gonna try.
not even a little bit. Oh, wait, I already clicked it. I already clicked it once.
Did you click the replay the animation button?
Yes! Yes, I did.
You're the fourth.
So you're killing me.
So I win by. Oh, big pineapple pin.
Sonia! Team 1!
Dead fish.
Dead fish in a blender.
Dead fish. Dead fish in a blender.
Dead fish in a blender.
Dead fish in a blender.
All right, good job, guys. Real quick, the scores and the order. Third place, Lulu with 11,733. Fourth place, Sonia with 9,663.
No, do it.
And fifth place, Hunter Big Boy with 9,389. All right, so Sonia, your prize. You get first dibs on donuts.
Wait, what does that say?
You can go have yours now if you want.
Go line up.
No, just Sonia. It's just Sonia. She's the only one who gets donuts. Everybody else has to play this game to get donuts.
This is not a phone game. This next game is not a phone game.
Daniel, if we lose, is that going to be don't get donuts?
Everyone gets donuts. It's the order. It's purely the order.
I get what you mean. Just because
I'm going to go get water while you guys pick your name.
yeah. I'm getting water too.
No.
Water makes you unbelievable.
Chungos.
Or the chungos.
The big chungos. Hunter.
Daniel.
Chungos.
Daniel, let me do it. Landon, let me see your fingertips.
Alright, guys. Simple. Very simple. 7 questions to decide Who gets donuts
Donuts
first?
equals guys.
Not everybody can have their favorite. You might get left with a donut you barely like.
Alright,
But if you win, you win. Then you get so that's it. Alright, we're just going to do 7 questions about dinosaurs and donuts. And we'll see how you guys do. That's basically it. Okay, here we go. Question 1. Did we get all the team names?
No, we're waiting for these guys.
Oh, hurry up.
Oh wait, I didn't know we were supposed to make
Cash.
Cash?
Donuts and dinosaurs? Are we gonna like how donuts are made?
our name is just the best.
First question.
Guys.
Alright guys, give your answer to Hannah when you figure it out.
The first one. Wait, what is this? A leak.
D. That look that he gave.
I can't even see the letters.
That look that he gave.
Just know the first option is A, the second option is
D
B.
for dead fish in a blender.
Caleb, have you joined a team? Come forward and join a team. They're right in front of you.
Hi, Hunter.
You guys have your answer?
Caleb.
They all have an answer? Oh, they all have an answer? By all means, then. Let's see the answer.
Oh my gosh.
I told you guys.
They were Greek, by the way.
Wait, whoa.
The first donuts were Greek.
I'm sorry.
So, next time you're in a Greek person, just thank them.
Yeah, no, it's like
Theoretically, you walk up to me. You walk up to me. You push me.
Alright, question 2.
Hey, can anybody read that?
Evolutionary scientists hold uniformitarianism, which means...
Daniel, you picked the worst
I know, the
background
background
that
was pretty
Howard
terrible,
White.
wasn't it?
Daniel, one of the words
Let me see if I can fix the background.
Wait, Daniel, what does this say?
Yeah, I hear y'all. Let's just make it nice and generically dark. How about that?
Yes, please. No, because then the letters you say.
There we go. How's that?
Well, that's a lot better.
Is that better?
Except for that C is cut off.
Sorry about C. I don't know what the heck, but yeah. Are they not supposed to be what?
No, we're not on how many look at right now.
No, we're not doing that.
Daniel, see, you can't see the rest of it.
There we go. That one will fit.
Yeah.
Alright, guys. You want all our answers? Come on, Cash! Pick it up!
They said A.
Okay, the correct answer is...
Big Chungo!
Wait,
You guys said A.
the D. We didn't guess. We were asking.
I said pineapple. We didn't guess either. No.
Someone on your team said something.
No, we were asking each other.
No, I was never saying it.
Alrighty.
I told you guys.
Big Chungo.
Next question.
Here, sit on.
Exciting.
That
is not a style of bro.
I think it's
Chill, what you doing there, Malachi?
Hey.
I'm just waiting for my.
Yeah, we gotta just leave them over there.
Go with some of your team.
Yeah, they told me to go say the answer.
Did they tell you the answer?
No.
Then that's meaningless.
Cake.
If you're messing without a message, what are you?
It's C.
Okay, this time over.
C. C.
I said B.
It's C.
Malachi, ladies, you guys must do it.
It's C.
It's D.
No, it's not.
Cash said C.
Cash said C!
Landon.
What you guys say?
Landon.
Who's left? Standfish?
We already finished.
Who's Standfish?
It's C.
It's C because there are any rules.
Let's just take a vote.
The correct answer is.
And the correct answer is...
Wow!
I said C.
Ruler is one of my favorite donuts. It's so light and airy. It's almost hollow.
I like the donut.
It's an egg batter, and it puffs when you fry it. It's so airy.
I like the donut. You guys, pug bosses, you name yourself this every single
Dinosaur
week.
fossils are not usually found in this rock layer.
Jurassic Park.
Is Jurassic
It's C.
How? Wait, no. Okay.
Yeah, no.
C.
It's B. It's. Oh wait, what does that even say? Why does that say
C. Daniel.
Yeah, C.
You guys going with C?
Number
Okay, you got a
D.
C over here.
Number D.
You guys, erase your answers.
D for Cash,
You guys should
right?
say that.
Cash, is that D?
Number D.
Just like how many
Big Chungos!
the alphabet? Hey.
You big Chungos! What letter? Which is it?
D. Actually, D. C.
Alright, and the correct answer is...
I know it, let's go.
D! Good job, guys. I think if memory serves, they're actually in order. It's literally like backwards in time.
Daniel.
Yo.
In my earth science class, we were just learning about this Thursday.
And you got it wrong.
Seriously, you're just learning about that? I learned about that like at the beginning of the year.
Huh, I wonder which one.
Alright. Donuts give you mostly which vitamin?
So wait.
It's important to know this. It helps you form a balanced diet with donuts. Em, have we done math on pieces?
She's searching it up on her phone.
You want to do head
I'm putting it in the phone.
I call it
Letter B.
D. Just like in my movie.
Number B.
What do you guys say?
D.
Hey, Abby says no. What is that? Oh, that is D? Oh, okay.
Number B. Cash says number B.
You gotta round it. Round it.
Really? Why do we have to have the
Yeah,
same
there you go.
answer?
Much better. Now it's an O. Alright, do we have more answers yet?
C.
Come on, big Chungos. C?
I hurt my funny bone.
The correct answer.
Laughing. Iron isn't a vitamin.
Daniel, iron isn't a vitamin.
It's a mineral.
It's a mineral.
Have you heard?
Therefore, you played us.
You lied.
I think that's kind of a technicality.
Daniel lied.
Whoa.
Oh my God, he said it in the video.
But he
Don't look it up!
Yeah, look it
We're
up.
doing it anyway. Dude.
What are you doing?
Behemoth!
My God!
See?
Yeah, but there is no Yes.
Come on, Bug Bosses! Bug Bosses say C!
You can never be final.
How was it?
By Albert Einstein ripped up.
I did.
He dropped a Cheerio on the ground and he stepped on it and was like, oh wow.
If they were out.
He made a donut and then it was
It's not
Money.
If they were made on
Because they were made out of stick.
He dropped his Cheerio on the ground and he stepped on it and he was like, oh no, I stepped on his Cheerio.
Yeah, no, ours. Yeah, sorry.
Hunter? You speak with respect to your leaders.
Ah!
Yo, that's your gosh.
None of that.
Get that out of here.
Haha, you guys all got capital
The answer
A's.
is-
We got lowercase A's.
If it was C, it would be like a towel. There wouldn't be a stick.
I know.
It'd be a rod or
That would
something.
be like a burn.
If it was a stick, either the donut would be burned in the middle, or it would
Malachi.
be severely
Or splinters. They have like splinters as you slid off the stick.
803.
Are you joking? I'm supposed to go to bed at 7:31 and wait, what?
Do we know if Sunday already took hers?
Brief shelf.
I said like
Sonia, did you ever get your donuts? You did? How
I'm
many did you
supposed to
pick?
go to bed at 7:31.
2 pieces. You can have a third piece.
And 8:03 and 9 seconds.
I'm at
No,
about
she won.
yeah,
She won the first.
that's like fall over because I'm past my
Honestly, every team just pick a different letter according to
All right,
where
guys,
you
5
are.
seconds.
A,
You
B,
get no
C,
credit.
D.
5, 4, 3.
B. Cash says B. Cash says B.
Why is everyone going up?
Thank you, Hannah. You're amazing.
We did the same.
You're already up there.
Whoa, 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 whoa.
Are you kidding? He's
Now
going
you have no reason to be angry.
I knew it.
Guess what?
You have
They told me.
Who knows the word suddenly? Who knows the word suddenly?
Me.
Anyone?
Okay,
Okay, that's
Wear glasses.
There's only 7 questions. Why should you 9?
Because it'll explode.
You know what? You're right. It is 9. I totally
It'll
miscounted.
explode. It'll explode.
Who's the last one?
I don't know. But a lot of always like to show me.
Ow! I'm raising my hand.
All right, guys. This is the final question. Let's see where we stand right now.
Jeez, Big Chungos, you got almost all of them right. And Nate's just being your.
Big Chungo's in the lead. But right now, if Cash wins it and Chungos lose it, we'll have a tie.
No way! Chungos have it in the bag.
They said
I'm not sure. It is A.
But I'm not pretty sure.
All of us say A.
No, I said I'm not pretty sure, but I am pretty sure. Hey!
Yes!
All right, guys. Final answer time.
It's an A.
I knew you. Do it.
You sold it.
That's A, B, C.
Alright, Sonia, you still have rights. You want the donut piece? You want to take it? They're about to go get theirs. So.
I make you a
Go!
Alright, guys, hold up. You're not getting donuts yet.
Why?
Unless you are Sonia. Sonia gets her last piece.
My name's Sonia.
When your team is called up, you can go get 3 pieces. We've sliced up the donuts into multiple pieces. Now, they can all be the same donut. You can take 3 of the same donut, I don't care. But you can also mix and match. So you can have a little bit of each kind, have a few different kinds. So, after Sonia gets her last piece, then it is up to Big Chungos. Because they won first prize, they get to go get their 3 pieces each.
And then Cash.
And then when Big Chungo's done, Cash can go up there. For now, wait, Cash. Don't even go up yet.
Matt, no!
Matt!
Bad man!
Win, Matt. I'm sorry.
I'm set as sick.
Matt, it doesn't change the fact that you're being lax.
He broke my leg. I can't walk.
There will be enough.
I can't.
There will be enough. I just can't guarantee.
Hurry up! We'll get the best donuts. Oh, yeah.
Sit up.
Wow, Hunter.
Why do you keep coming up?
Ah!
How big are the donuts?
Erasing your names and writing.
Wait. I don't actually know who's in first, second, third. I need to know.
The cash
Go away. I know that's second. Okay, so they've got 2. They've got 3.
He's just trying to sabotage our team.
Back up.
He's trying to eat our team.
I didn't make the donuts. I think it was Caleb.
I know who
Not
did.
him. The other kid.
Alright, at least we're not the last.
I'm disappointed there's not
You're on the other fall.
Ark.
We are the last.
I want a donut. Oh wait, what?
I want a pineapple.
Wait, am I allowed to get a donut now? Please. Can I get a donut? You give donuts 100.
No,
am I allowed to?
No, it's not your turn yet.
What? How am I not allowed to?
Is that true?
Wait, what happened to like the other team?
So Cash is getting their donuts right now.
Where is
when Cash is
everybody
done,
else?
then Dead Fish gets to go.
To be fair.
It's dead fish in a blender.
No, Dead Fish in a blender in parentheses.
To be fair. You can raise the question. Wait, why am I sitting? Because I'm taking chemistry.
Oh, nice. Did you notice that Lee was so goalie?
So goalies. I didn't actually see that on my glasses on. I was like squinting trying to figure out what it said.
There's a whole bunch of like long dinosaur words, and then the one that was not about dinosaurs wasn't even real biology words.
Oh.
Island and acetylene were both on that choice.
Yeah, because I thought
But they're long words, so like if you don't know what they mean, then.
They're done. Can we see?
All right,
let's go.
Now, Dead Fish in a blender. Go get your donuts.
I could only read the island one.
You guys have
Those are the ones that I do what I put down.
Nice.
You guys met, right?
And the last one was easy because I exploded a donut one time.
Oh, yeah. As the water boils, it turns into steam, and any of the water that comes out under the surface of the oil comes out in a like bursting bubble and just flings the oil all over the place.
Yeah, burn myself.
How is it only like
If you guys are still hungry after donuts, we can munch on the leftover pizza and veggies. Feel free to grab some and come back to your seat.
You want veggies when there's donuts.
It's my babies.
wait,
I don't think anyone should like that. I mean, I'm really healthy.
They will not be about dinosaurs. But if you want to watch the other dino videos, just go look it up. cctgo.com/dino. Easy peasy. There's like 80 minutes of video there.
And the other front pieces that were cut in just half.
No, I got a new video, and I'm trying to make it shorter, so it's more back and forth conversation, less.
Like they're like this big. Rowan.
No kicking. Rowan, finish your donut real quick because I want to see tricky. I need you to finish. No, I need you to finish your donut really quick.
Or any time in the next, like 2 hours.
I want to do it now. Or Rowan, just keep it in your mouth. Just keep it in your mouth.
Is it Pug Boss's turn yet?
Put your hands.
There we go, Pug Bosses! Get some donuts!
Stop moving it! 1, 2, skip these 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Hey! 1, 2, I'm gonna skip these 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. No, they're not.
Yeah, they are.
No, they're not. I was scared of so. I know. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I know. Oh goodness! I'm gonna die. I'm gonna go.
No.
What is my good today?
That was really.
She ran away.
Trick on you.
She jumped off the balcony.
That's why I know about donuts.
I don't do that.
That's why I know about
that's cheating!
Oh, it's all gone.
I got like
No! No! It's not allowed!
Stop cheating!
I'm not cheating! I don't like this! Cheating! Oh my gosh!
Ah! No! Using your hands. No! That's unfair! That's unfair! That's unfair! She's doing
Wait.
Nailed it. That's exactly what I mean.
Ah!
What do you mean?
Wait, leave there.
What do you mean? I want to talk. Really? They don't.
Why? Leave me alone.
What do you mean, SpongeBob SquarePants? It is SpongeBob SquarePants.
What? Now that I know!
You know what?
You have to put your eat it here. No, it's mine! Yeah, you can let it
Alright, guys! Find a seat. Let's talk about some cavemen.
I know, right?
You
reached over backwards. Whoa, man. Victor yeeted himself.
You guys are so much fun to kill. Your hands are nice. We're just gonna stay here like this.
Anyone turn on the lights?
We can turn on some more. And can we turn on more lights? Not necessarily all the way, all four, but like.
Just know what anybody has gone like 20%.
No, the other way. Yeah, that one.
Oh, you want me to do a different thing?
Alrighty, guys, find a seat.
I hit it so hard. Congratulations.
What?
You made that.
I
know where he was sleeping.
No, she just has deep.
Ladies, find a seat.
I know where you sleep at.
And can you corral the girls in the hall?
Hey, you have to say, I know where you live.
Why do you have blue walls?
That's the
Bachelor's chair.
Wait, I know where you
chair is
sleep.
next to you.
Dropped all
Okay.
Oh my
goodness!
Yeah, why is it so loud the whole time? I know.
I don't know. Talk to him.
Because Daniel decided to fill up junior hires.
I filled it with middle schoolers. I don't know what I was thinking.
Yeah.
Is Landon around?
He's outside and he refuses to come in.
Where's outside? When you say outside, what do you mean like?
Outside of this room.
Thank you. That's comforting. Peach, could you see if that spill in front of that cup under Landon's chair is a fresh spill or just a perfectly placed stain?
Perfectly placed stain.
You sure it's not actual wetness?
Ew, why are you touching it with your toe? That's
It might
disgusting.
actually be more sanitary than her hands if you think about it.
Lick it.
It's like no one's gonna drink it.
Ew!
Is it wet or is it just old?
I'm gonna lick it.
It's not wet.
It's not.
It's not wet.
Okay, thank you. All right, we're now going to be talking about cavemen. This is actually the #1 requested topic from you guys. Out of the whole 16 set of topics we picked from your votes, cavemen is #1, which I thought was really cool. I don't know if you guys know this. We started topic nights a few years back due to your questions about cavemen. That was the original topic, and it was on a Sunday morning, no less. Cavemen. Yep. James, can you put the pool stuff away? Thank you. All right. Here's what you guys had to say about cavemen. You've heard humans evolved from cavemen and they hit people with clubs.
What's a club?
Now, due to the structure of this sentence, I have to wonder if humans aren't the ones hitting people with clubs and it's because they evolved from cavemen.
I have a question.
That makes you think. They are very ugly, which I think is kind of rude, since you've probably never met one.
I did.
That's a little stereotypical. And then they were Neanderthals and lived a long time ago. But notice how along is missing the space, so that means they just lived along.
They lived along.
Along something, I don't know.
A long time ago.
Alongside.
Alongside time.
Along with me.
A long time.
A long time ago.
They lived
alongside. They lived alongside.
Alright, and then last it says that we used to be them, and then we evolved.
Uninvolved.
Alright, so here's what you guys said about cavemen. Is there anything missing though?
Oh, yes.
What is not up there?
The definition of club.
Anybody else? Anybody else?
Ooh, right here.
Because there's only so much space on my slide.
I just wrote ooh, yeah, right here.
So why would I put that on there? think about that. Yeah, Weston.
They drool.
They drool. Oh yes, we can tell that from the drool fossils, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, actually, you can see them.
In case you're new, this is what sarcasm looks like. Yes, Jonathan.
Ooga booga. They like
That's
to
it? You're Ooga Booga? That's all you have? Okay, I thought there was more. Hunter!
Like in the movie Minions when they hit a bear and then they die.
I'm so confused.
Just watch Minions.
Oh, okay. I will fix all my problems. Yes. Make tools like what?
No.
Like clubs. They
didn't make the
That's the highest form of tool they made it to was clubs. I would have gone for like bush trimmer or
Bush
like
camping.
lawnmower, possibly a trowel.
How about
Yes.
Well,
Car.
so they weren't just known as like stupid people. They
Are you
also,
sure about
like,
that?
They actually survived through what we would call death. Like we would call it like we would call it hell, but like they
What?
Yes.
Good
Questions.
question.
Many
Okay.
questions are to be asked.
Wait. When you say what we would call hell, please undo the metaphor in
outside
your words
world.
there.
Actually having to go.
Because there's only certain things I would call hell, and I don't think it's what you're talking about.
Actually having to kill your food.
What people who like live in rich houses and
There we go. Privileged folk.
drive Ferraris everywhere. You know, like
First soda spilled.
So we'll just take off all the allegory there. Just bad
Oh my
conditions.
gosh.
They live through bad conditions.
No!
Okay.
They're
Cool.
getting a new skin!
And it was Peach too?
Yes.
Peach? After
think it was
all...
Alright, it's going that way.
Hunter, don't walk near it. You'll spill it again.
where is Peach?
Hunter, why? Why would you even tempt the fate, Hunter? Don't do it. Don't do it, Hunter.
Don't kick the can.
Where'd Peach go?
Why you
I
stand
can't advocate assassination, but I might just look the other way right now. Sonia.
Hunter, drink it.
At least help, Hunter.
So I have a
Alright, look out, Hunter, look out.
Oh, it smells good.
It's weird. Of course it's not. It's DP. I don't know.
It's Dr.
Okay, sorry.
I have a question
Sonia.
about the last topic I
Oh, you want to go back to dinosaurs?
Yeah, 1 second.
Oh, okay. I'm not sad, I'm surprised.
yeah,
I don't know what a dinosaur is.
Since hair isn't preserved, dinosaurs could have like flowing manes of like mullets.
Like a cross between a mullet and like a horse mane.
Yes.
A new stain.
No, dude.
That'd be so majestic.
They could just like
We could have
Oh, I would
Joe
love it.
Dirtosaurus.
That'd be amazing. Ooh, favorite factoid, I totally forgot about dinosaurs because you got my brain thinking about soft tissue. We found dinosaur bones with soft tissue inside.
Yes. And then they're like, oh
And-
wait, but like.
And so like originally the first scientist who found that and like published it was shunned by all the other like paleontologists. Like, you're stupid and you're making up conspiracies. So she sent off her stuff to multiple other labs without like her actual name on it and got back the results and they're all unanimous. Yep, this is soft tissue and it's a T-Rex bone. So it's legit.
Jurassic Park.
so they had
Dragons think it's really cool that we make water in our mouths. They're like, what the heck, that's crazy.
Yes. The dragons tell stories about
Put it
the
on the wrong
mythical
spot.
little squishies that can spit water out of their mouths. I think it's more likely though if you like actually stick a dragon next to a human long enough for a sighting to occur, they'd actually talk about the water that flows freely from our
She'll never
eyes.
know.
This is fine.
Music just streams out. Yeah, sorry, back to cavemen for a second.
I have 3 things.
Wow.
First of all, they can get beat up by worms.
What?
I'm so lost.
They crawl like lizards.
What?
Alright, all you have to do is think about
Which animal are you thinking of?
The lizard type.
Caveman?
And they invented
The hug?
the rhymes with grub.
And also, don't forget Ugg is important. Yes.
and the rock.
That's nasty.
Guys, I couldn't even hear her. She raised her hand and everything. Sorry. Oh, you're welcome. I didn't actually go get them, so you can say thank you to Caleb's mom when she gets back here. We might hand them out as a future prize in the evening, or else we'll just say everybody can have some. We'll see. Yes, Joey.
There's a lot of different species of cavemen.
Yes, different subcategories.
Well, there's Homo erectus, Australopithecus, Neanderthal, Homo sapiens.
Yep. Are the Homo sapiens cavemen?
No.
Good answer.
And then there's Homo.
All right. Yeah. What? Very hairy.
Hairy man.
Does the hair?
Very thick.
Did the hair get preserved in the fossils?
Hairy man.
What about a hairy
Yes.
Esau.
Esau was hairy all over.
Esau resembles a hairy
All right. Last hand, Abby.
No
How are
hairy.
So I can know if the donuts are delicious. Can I have one?
Did you not get any donuts yet?
I did.
But
Don't remember what they taste
I don't. That's a very good answer. All right, guys. Here's some factoids. Here's some factoids about early man. Okay, now these are groups of people that have frequently been called cavemen, and some of which you actually mentioned by their proper Latin scientific name. They built seaworthy boats. They performed surgery with tools that they built. They wore makeup and ornate jewelry, which they made themselves. They married modern-day humans, and they weren't on the paleo diet.
what does that mean?
Paleo diet's a popular diet these days that was made by someone who said, hey, let's figure out what cavemen ate back in the day, and then let's make that into a modern-day diet, like Atkins diet or South Beach diet. But the hilarious thing was they made the diet based off the theories about cavemen, and then we actually found cavemen who were buried with remnants of food stuck in their teeth and ground like into the pockets of their molars. And we were able to take apart the little leftovers and figure out what food they came from. And it was things not on the paleo diet. That was the hilarious part. So like on paleo diet, you can't have grains. They ate a bunch of grains. They had like bread stuck in their teeth. So people have been eating bread since they were people. That's just a little fun fact
That
for you.
literally doesn't make sense, but okay.
So, since before we thought of them as people, but I'm saying they were if they did all the same things as us, sailed on the sea, performed surgery, married modern-day humans. So we know that one because we've actually found joint burial sites. It was very common back then to be buried with your spouse, that you would actually be buried side by side. And in one particular case, we actually have a culture where they would unearth your spouse to then bury you, so they could be sure, like, you were actually arm in arm in the grave. And we dug it up and we found it was Neanderthal on one side and Homo sapien on the other.
No!
Crazy, right?
Human.
And they're like wearing their matching necklaces in their graves. It's pretty sweet.
Human.
Isn't that cute? So like Neanderthal humans not only lived at the same time, they knew each other and they intermarried. Okay. The thing about cavemen is really this. The word caveman is a misnomer. Does anyone know what a misnomer is?
Oh my goodness!
You know misnomer?
No, I'm just ready.
Malachi, you hurt my soul. It has bruises now. Does anyone know misnomer? No? Okay.
Oh my goodness.
Let's see, what's a good misnomer example?
2 + 2 = fish.
Ooh, here's one. Xbox One.
What's that?
Yes, yay, yay.
Which number Xbox is the Xbox One?
2.
The one. The one that's named is Xbox One.
It's
3.
not a number.
No, it's the second one.
It's the third one.
No,
It's the third one.
No, it's the first.
Xbox 360, Xbox One.
And then Xbox.
But it's named One, but it's not the first one. So that's a misnomer. It's where the name is not valid for the thing that you are naming. It doesn't mean what it means. So caveman is essentially that. We found tons of people that are being labeled caveman that didn't live in caves. The name has stuck around since we've learned more about them. When we first found them, we found some of them in caves. The remains of them in caves. So we theorized that early man lived in caves. But since then, we found some of the same species, if you want to call it that. We found more Neanderthals that didn't live in caves, that lived in tents and lived in houses and lived in whatever they felt like. And we've also found other groupings, not just Neanderthals, that lived in various different circumstances. But they're all lumped under that term cavemen, almost comically. So most of the time now you go to a museum, it won't actually say caveman. It'll say something like early man, or ancient man, or Paleolithic man, or some other term. So caveman is a misnomer. Now, that said, we do have evidence that people lived in caves. But just not like a bunch of them or all of them. Just certain ones. So, for instance, you go all the way back to the beginning of the Bible, there's Adam and Eve, and then they had some boys. Do you guys remember those boys' names?
They had 2 boys.
2 boys at first. And what were those boys' names?
Cain and Abel.
Cain and Abel. And then there was like a third boy after that.
Really?
Yeah.
His name
Adam Jr.
Yeah.
In the story of Cain and Abel, hadn't like no one gotten murdered before?
Yeah, basically.
So,
that was
like,
the point.
So like
which
he
one
just
died?
laid on the ground and they were
so
like,
Cain just like beat him senseless and was like, oh, he's dead. Who knows?
No.
no, he beat him senseless.
Other things have
and-
died that weren't human, so I'm guessing they understood kind of how it worked.
Yeah.
Animals had died up to that point, so like they knew this is what happens when you beat something over the head.
What?
Does anybody remember the third guy's name? Yeah.
Bill.
No.
Bill.
Yeah.
Bill Nye the Science Guy.
No.
Steve.
Seth. It's Seth.
That's the most generic name of everyone said.
Cain kills Abel. Cain is scared of the family taking revenge on him, killing him in response to his murder. So he goes off and lives by himself. Before he can build anything to live in, before he can sow a tent or build a house, no. He lives in a cave. That's his first place he lives because he's running away from home where like everyone had built their stuff. He just leaves it all behind and he lives in a cave. Later in the Bible we read about David living in caves off and on for years while he was on the run. It was just a natural shelter, very easy to use. Lots of people did it. After the flood, we have the Tower of Babel and then we have that first dispersion. And right after the Tower of Babel would have been about the same time as the Ice Age.
Oh my goodness, that's
So
the same exact.
right after Tower of Babel, you get into the Ice Age, which lasted somewhere around like 400, 600 years. You're moving from place to place looking for something that ain't frozen. You find a cave. That's pretty sweet. You would definitely use that cave.
No, I wouldn't.
And
I
again,
use the
we
stone.
have the evidence that people lived in caves. We have the cave drawings. We have
the
people's
pineapples.
remains. We have all kinds of used stuff, like their garbage left in caves. So we have the evidence that says people lived in caves. But
Jamaica.
there is no evidence they were covered head to toe in hair.
Actually.
There is no evidence.
Let me show
Fossils
you
don't preserve that.
Yes, they do.
Now, what we do have is we have some DNA, and we've matched that DNA to modern humans. Because this is the really cool thing, guys. Cavemen DNA
It's the same as ours.
is
Oh my
pretty much the
goodness.
same as ours. Now, there's differences, there's distinctions, but it's not big ones. So, like, when you look at Neanderthal DNA, yes, it's different from us, but not in the ways you'd expect. It's different in the way that you guys don't have a large brow, so your DNA shows that you wouldn't have a large brow. Your DNA shows your nose at your size, their DNA shows their nose at their size. So they are essentially, guys,
My mom.
a race. They're a race. They're not a species. They're a race because they intermarried with us. They had kids with us.
Ew.
Like the same as humans because they were humans. All right, so there's a lot of different groups, and he mentioned some of their Latin names. Australopithecus is one I want to pick on, though. Australopithecus is also a misnomer because it is now a big giant umbrella term for lots of other subspecies. So there's this kind of Australopithecus and this kind of Australopithecus. I mean, the list is growing. They're adding new ones constantly. And the problem is that most of the other groupings you can look at really simply and just say, look at the traits. Look at what shape their skeleton is. Look at what shape their skull is. And you can just point and go, well, that one's an ape.
I'm
Clearly,
an ape.
not enough brain matter to be human. Clearly, their DNA is totally different than ours. Clearly, their bones are totally different than ours. But the problem with Australopithecus is that it encompasses so many different found species that some of them under that name are clearly human, and some of them under that name are clearly ape. And so most of the names you can just say like, oh yeah, Neanderthal, totally human. All the evidence points to Neanderthal being human. But then when you say Australopithecus, suddenly you're not just talking about one thing. You're actually talking about like a bunch of different ones. And so now it's like some of them are this and some of them are that, and it makes it feel like they found that missing link. They found that in between. But the truth is when you dig down to the species level, each sample of an Australopithecus is clearly ape or human. What we don't have, though, is we don't have any evidence of a halfway man. We don't have any evidence at all of someone who's part ape, part human. We've never found a scrap of it. We thought we did once. It was really interesting. We found a bunch of ape-like bones, and people were like, "Whoa, this is crazy!" And we dug them up, and what we found around those ape-like bones were the remains of a village, like with huts and stuff. We found like fossilized remains of huts and the bones of apes, and we're like, "Oh my gosh, apes for the village! We found it, guys! It's the missing link."
Planet of Apes.
Stupid!
Well, we kept on digging, and it turns out that village was populated by humans that were murdered by apes. And that's just a really weird circumstance. But eventually you find the bones of the humans, and they're not in the shape of a human. They're in a pile.
No!
Because the apes ate them and threw away the bones. And so, like, scientists thought when they first started digging, like, we did it, we found it, this is the one, we've got the missing link, and then they kept digging, and they're like, oh, it's just a really sad, sad story. That's disappointing.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
What? I honestly forgot what it was.
Okay, cool. Anyone else? Yeah, James.
I'm just saying, if apes try to kill us now with our technology, we would probably win.
No.
Depending on how prepared you are.
Planet of the Apes. Have you watched it?
But like in a one-on-one where you're caught off guard.
Oh no.
I'm gonna win. I'm literally gonna win.
Apes are strong, man. I do not want to fight an ape.
No.
There's a reason the walls are so strong at the zoo, okay? It is not a petting zoo animal, an ape.
Yes, it is. I'll fight this.
Certain ones that have like been people normalized.
I'm
They've got like human friends.
When you insert it, it never comes back.
All right, guys. We're gonna watch some videos real quick on DNA.
No.
My brain.
It already hurts. Okay, that's gonna get annoying pretty soon.
How big is the gap between banana and
pineapple?
Because this is the question. If we're looking for a missing link,
You misspelled that last word. It's spelled apple.
thanks, Matt.
That's not a spelling.
If we're looking for a missing link, I gotta ask the question: how many missing links are we looking for?
Oh my god.
Because is it really only one?
There's only one missing
If the
link.
gap is small between ape and man, then yeah, maybe you can get away with one missing link species. But if the gap is large, you don't just need one missing link. You would need
22.
a bunch of missing links. So the question I have is, how far away are apes from humans?
27 links.
I know the answer.
Everyone hears that the chimpanzee genome is 98 to 99% similar to a human.
Turn off the lights.
But did you know that these estimates are based on isolated segments of DNA? It's not based on the whole genome. Overall, the chimpanzee genome is more like 70% similar to a human. To put it in perspective, a human also shares about 50% of the same genetic makeup with a banana, 60% with food.
I like bananas.
While the comparison is based on selected gene sequences, humans can share genes with just about anything. But does that mean we're related?
So, for example, a lot of the DNA that supposedly is the same between chimps and people would be for something like metabolizing foods, breathing in air, which we call respiratory physiology, and the various processes that not only chimpanzees and people have to undergo, but also mice and rats and all the other vertebrates in the world. We all have to digest food, we all have to breathe in the same air, we have to drink the same water, so therefore so much of the genetic material would necessarily have to be the same.
All right, so this is the problem with the argument. If chimps and humans share a bunch of DNA, does that mean, does that force the conclusion we came from them? Does that make sense? That's the argument, essentially. But that messes with the evolutionary tree when you start to account for every species on the planet. If bananas have 50% shared DNA and fruit flies have 60, suddenly where we are on the tree in relation to the other species starts to get really, really messy. And the tree loses shape. So when they make the tree, they cherry pick certain parts of the genome, and they only compare those parts so that the tree doesn't get messy. But that's a serious issue. If your scientific theory relies on you cherry picking things based on the knowledge of what your scientific theory predicts, then you are skewing the result because of what you already believe. So the tree doesn't look anything like what they say. We would essentially have everything having common ancestors really not that long ago, and then everything should have been completely different not that long ago. So you go back just a few thousand years and we should have fossils of completely different biome. Like no plants are the same, no animals are the same, completely different. But that's not what we see. We see many of our still living species today in the fossil record from the very beginning of time. With no change, no alteration, no adaptation whatsoever. The species staying the same from the bottom layer of the fossil record all the way to the top. Yeah, Maya.
My mom looked it up one time. Actually, like the human DNA shares more in common with a pig than it does with like
like a monkey or a chimp.
It's interesting you mention it. When we do artificial organ growing, we don't grow them in apes. We grow them in pigs. Isn't that interesting?
So, like, why don't people think that we, like, evolved from pigs?
No, pigs are
Because
better.
pigs
Are
the best.
All right, so big question here, guys. How many missing links? Yeah, James.
I love my pig. My pig is my baby.
By an ape?
Like
And not personally, no. Really? What kind?
No, he's lying. He's
It
lying.
was just an ape? Not sure what kind? Oh, that's good. All right. Big question for you. Based on the distance now we've seen of 30%, how many missing links do you think there should be in an evolutionary chain from apes to humans?
7.
6.
7. I have a question.
6 for 30%? How many for 30%, you think? You're going to make up that 30%.
42.
Pizza. That's a fraction, right?
What are you doing?
I think we had like 12 slices on a pie, so like
Well,
12?
it matters
Oh, anyone
how
else?
big the pie is.
Or Celestinos. Because Celestinos.
That's not how fractions work.
What type
Okay.
of a pie?
Let's see.
I have the answer.
How many missing links you guys think we've found so far?
That is exactly how fractions work.
The missing link, commonly thought of as a hypothetical ape-like creature. This evolutionary rock star is supposed to bridge the gap between man and ape, but there are missing links all over Darwin's evolutionary tree. And guess what? They are still missing. For instance, dogs and bears are thought to be cousins, related to each other through a missing link. Yeah, same can be said for every other gap in evolution. And some of these gaps are huge, like the gap between sea creatures with and without bones. While scientists have found fish fossils with bones and ones without, they have yet to find what goes in between. All types of animals are thought by evolutionists to have risen by the transformation of some other animal type. And as each part of the evolutionary tree branches from one type to another, there appears to be another missing link. And that's the big problem with evolution. Evolution depends on countless missing links, each of which lived in a past we can never know. And they all have supposedly gone extinct, replaced by their evolved descendants. For example, if some types of fish evolved into some types of amphibians, then there should have been a few changed along the way from 90% fish, then 80% fish, and so on until 100% amphibian emerged. But the evidence in the fish are still missing. Creation says that all life was created after its hind. We can easily see that creation has upheld that process to this day. Evolution says we have to trust that there are many unseen missing links out there. So it's plain to see that the theory of evolution is a theory full of gaps. What do you find more believable?
All right, so this is the big issue. When you have a scientific theory, you're supposed to come up with a hypothesis, right? That's how the theory gets its start. And then you do a test on that hypothesis to see if your hypothesis holds up or if it doesn't. And then you go back to the drawing board. You say, hey, I need to make an adjustment, or I need to throw the whole thing out. The hypothesis in evolution says that when you dig into the fossil record, you will find in-between creatures. Creatures that are halfway between something and something else. That's what the hypothesis of evolution says. That when you dig into the fossil record, you'll find something that shows us how fish without bones evolved into fish with bones. Yeah? Yeah, if the theory is true, then nothing would ever be fully evolved. Everything's in the process of evolving. So you would still have to find something to get us from, say, the first life, the first cells, the first whatever was the first, to the diversity, right? All the different branches of species. Or else you'd have to explain the crazy math of simultaneous biogenesis of different kinds all over the planet all at the same moment.
What are you doing? Stop.
Does that make sense? If that's the case, then the math is so against you, a creator makes mathematical sense. Peach, can you find your way to a chair?
Yes.
Thanks.
That's what I thought.
Awesome. All right.
Take it off.
So the issue is, if the hypothesis is we're going to find missing links, we're going to find in-between creatures that are halfway one way, halfway another way.
No.
The issue is we haven't found any. We haven't found any kinds. Dinosaurs are actually one of the biggest exceptions ever. It's one of the only times where there's an entire group of animals that is, in our time extinct. But we find them in the fossil record. Almost every other creature we find in the fossil record is part of a group we still have. and it matches the traits of the group that's still alive today. The traits haven't changed. It still fits the group. Now, dinosaurs aren't completely different. They're still reptiles, but they have so many characteristics that separates them out from lizards, so many characteristics that separate them from what evolutionists say they evolved into, birds. They merit their own grouping. But that's really the exception. The rule is, generally all the fossils you find are just like the creatures we have now, with small variations. But this is the bigger issue. And we'll get into this as we get into evolution. That essentially, nothing that evolution is predicting is being proven true in the evidence. When that happens in the scientific community, in any other regard, in any other realm of science, when there's no evidence found that the hypothesis predicts, you throw out the theory.
What is that?
That's what you do in the rest of the scientific world. You just toss it out, you start over, you come up with a brand new hypothesis. But that's not what's happened. Instead,
Daniel, what is that article 1.5?
that's like a little, what am I trying to think of? What's the tiny monkey? Well, he is a little bit like a lemur, huh?
Oh,
what?
It starts with an
What?
M.
Oh yeah, I think it is an M.
Flashy.
No, not chimp.
It's the one that can drink straws and stuff. And
Yeah, they're always like stealing stuff from the city. Anyways, I can't think of it.
Oh, is that a monkey? That's a monkey.
I know. But you go back far enough in time, they say monkeys and apes had common ancestors too.
No, they didn't.
No, they didn't? Okay, I've been informed.
Did we evolve from apes?
That is the theory. They say we evolved from apes.
That's literally the
But
whole
there's-
thing we've been talking
I
about.
feel like James just found us. Hey James. How's it
Is
going?
evolution a
Good to see you,
myth?
Were
man.
you still getting attacked by an orangutan at Walmart?
Yes, it is.
That's funny, Hunter. Yes.
No, I asked a
Ooh.
question.
I would
gave you
say,
an answer.
if you define the word evolution very carefully, it's not a myth.
EVOLUTION.
However, evolution is not the correct answer to a big question everyone says it's the correct answer to. People think it's the answer to the question, how did we get here? I don't think it's the answer to that one. We'll get into that more as we get into evolution specifically, but this is it for apes now. If you guys have any more caveman, ape type questions, now's your chance to ask them before we move on to the next game. Yes, sir.
What's the next game?
Oh my goodness.
No, I was raising my hand and I had a serious question.
You have a serious question, really? Shoot, go for it.
Think. I don't know if you know this or not, but the early stages.
Hey guys, I called on Malachi. Rescue, shut your mouths.
Yes, shut up.
Wait, what? Hunter.
Kill him.
Shush.
Also, Joey. Shh.
Did the early stages of humans have like colonies like that we have today?
When you say colony, are you what about it?
Like ants.
Because a colony is just like another word for a group. What do you mean?
Groups.
Just they have groups?
Like different groups that were like. Okay.
Yeah.
That's my only question.
Okay, cool. Yeah, no, they did. They totally did. Okay, great. Time for a game. In honor of fallen cavemen everywhere,
Dang it!
we're going to be playing a game very much like the cave drawings of yesteryear.
Charades! Pictionary!
Actually, I dare you to do this.
I vote Pictionary. What does RSVP mean?
No, we go.
It means basically like sign up. No, he wants.
It's
3-year-old Pictionary.
It's 3-year-old Pictionary, ladies and gentlemen.
That's disgusting. That will give me
We're going to be
nightmares.
playing a game where we have to guess what they've drawn. It's going to be much harder than looking at caveman drawings. These are 3-year-old drawings.
Oh no!
Now, I have my very own 3-year-old at home, but I didn't want to embarrass her, so I did not choose any of her drawings. None of these are hers. None of these are hers. We may do that someday, but probably only with her permission. I wouldn't want to oust her like that. Let's do this one a little differently. You guys will be playing for yourselves, and the way it's going to work is like survival. Okay, so this is zombie round. So everybody stand up. If you're in the game and you're alive, you should be inside the chairs. Okay, inside the ring of chairs. Come forward if you're behind the chairs. Matt, Caleb, Joey, everyone inside. Okay, and if you lose at any point in the game, you guys gotta back up. Go back up. Inside the chairs if you're in the game. Once you lose, then you get out of the chairs. Hey Landon, why are you eating my donuts? He didn't get any yet? Oh, dang, man. You get 3 pieces. Okay.
Wait, Caleb, show.
We're going to do this real simple.
I was trying to go like this in his face.
You get an answer right, you stay in the circle of chairs. You get an answer wrong, you leave the circle of chairs, okay? So don't leave erroneously. I'm going to assume you meant to leave. I will have places for you to stand, okay? Alright, you guys ready? Here we go.
The living.
There's your first drawing.
What the heck?
If you think it's A, a vampire, please stand here. Right here on the blue carpet. If you think it's B, an angry cow, please stand right there in the middle.
I agree.
And if you think it's C, Kael'thas, Sunstrider, Master of the Burning Legion, then please stand on that blue rug right there.
Alright, we gotta go over
A is this blue rug right here.
Everyone has to fit on this.
C is this blue rug right here. 1 foot will count. And then B is everyone in the middle.
What about one toe?
Yeah, I'll count it. Yeah, so if you think it's the Burning Legion, go ahead and stick a foot on that blue rug right there. If you think it's an angry cow, stand in the middle. You have 3 seconds to decide. 3,
Probably an angry
2,
What did you say? Can you repeat?
1. Okay, you guys are off the rugs, so you're counting as a B if you don't move onto the rug. Right now is your last chance. You gotta be on the rug if you want it to be A. You gotta be in the middle if you want B. B's right here in the middle.
I'm gonna start
Oh my
calling
gosh,
mine.
Sonia. Here we go. Answer is A, a vampire, obviously. Okay, so everybody in the middle, everyone on that rug, you're out. Get out of the circle.
Get out of here!
Get out of the circle. No, don't sit down. That's wildly confusing. Get out of the circle.
Get out!
If you lose, you're gone.
Get out! Malachi!
See ya! Alright, next one.
Staining on the carpet, Davis.
Is this a crow looking for trash to eat, a T-Rex with abnormal stick-like growths out of his snout, or a yawning deer? A is a crow looking for trash to eat, that blue rug. Middle is a T-Rex with abnormal stick-like growths on his snout. And C is a yawning deer. 5 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. If you're on, you're on. If you're not, you're not. No one's picking B. Okay, so it's all A or C, and the answer is A. Everybody out of the circle except for these 2. They're the only ones left. All right.
This is so good.
Final round for a donut.
You got this!
Now keep in mind you can both lose, and that'd be sad, but it's possible.
What is that?
Is it A, zombie rabbit, B, a happy bat, or C, this is you, Daddy? I love those moments when Jane brings me a drawing and says, it's you. And I'm like, oh, I feel horrible inside. All right, here we go. And the answer is, happy bat, James, you get a donut. Yeah. Go, my friend. Everybody else, back in the circle. Back in the circle. James gets a donut. Well done. All right. A 3-horned goat. Blue rug over here. A is a 3-horned goat. A over here. B, Grondark, Lizard King of the North, right in the middle. C, a dancing gecko. This blue rug right here.
Where's C?
Don't. Stop. Okay, pick a side, pick a rug, pick the middle, pick something. 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Alright guys, here it is. Only person on B. Wow, this is it. This could be an instant win if it's actually Grondark, Lizard King of the North.
It's C.
It's C, a dancing gecko! Everyone on this rug stays, everyone on that rug leaves! Alright. Next up, is this A, a friendly centipede, B, a superhero cat fighting bad guys, or C, the coronavirus strain?
Wait, what?
Yes, this game is that new. It could literally be that answer. Alright, pick a side. 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Everyone's talking about it, obviously. Alright, you guys are all in the middle. Okay, here we go. Answer is a superhero cat fighting bad guys. You in the middle win. Everyone on both rugs, you're out.
Get out of here, Hunter.
Get out of here. Alright, next round. Is this A, a pterodactyl, B, a dragon who's also a fireman, or C, a rabbit relaxing in a hammock? 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Nobody on C. Let's see what happens here. It could all be lost. It's B, a dragon who's also a fireman. And all the parents go, that's nice, honey. That's nice.
What is this? Did I get it right?
Alright, is it only you two? Oh, here it is. Final round. Don't be wrong. Is it A, some sort of quail? B, a T-Rex named Scott? Or C, just a plain old duck? 3 seconds, Matt. What will it be? 3, 2, 1. He's sticking with a T-Rex named Scott. It's C, just a plain old duck. You get another donut.
Let's go. I get a donut.
All right, everybody back in.
Get it!
Come on over here. All right, guys. Is this A, a Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle drinking a smoothie? B, mommy drinking her coffee? Or C, Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible 3? A on that rug, B in the middle, C on this rug.
Wait, A, it's A.
No, you're over there.
We got this!
There we go. All right, on your marks. 3, 2, 1. You've locked in your answer. You're not touching that rug, right? Just back away.
What if my mommy doesn't drink coffee?
No.
Malachi.
Hold on.
Answer is C. It's Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible 3, everybody. You can tell because of the way that he is. All right, guys, if you're on that rug, you're in. Everybody else out.
What is it?
Yeah. Some kids get to watch all the things they shouldn't watch. It's true. It's sad, but it's true. Okay, are you in or out, Peach?
She's out.
Then get out of here. No, like seriously, the whole point of the chairs is that that's the line, and you're on the wrong side of it. Peach, you lost. Don't make this harder on yourself than it needs to be, Peach. All right, next up. A, sun blasting rays of death on unsuspecting beachgoers. B, a creepy octopus giving a hug. Or C, Spider-Man. Spooner-Moon.
Wait.
A is this rug. B is in the middle. C is this rug. Obviously the Spooner-Moon. That's just like so clear. C is this rug. Spider-Man is right there. Creepy octopus giving a hugs in the middle. And the sun blasting rays of death on unsuspecting beachgoers over there. Alright, and the answer is A, of course! I mean, come on. Wasn't it obvious? Can't you tell? Look at how angry that sun is. Alright, next up. Abby, you're out. Get out of here. Alright, next up. A king holding hands with his best friend who is a bee. Or B, an alien taking a guy to be probed. Or C, a huge fly whacking a man with a fly swatter. Ooh, tables have turned. Alright guys, king holding hands with his best friend is a bee. An alien taking a guy to be probed. A huge fly whacking a man with a fly swatter. 3 seconds to decide. 3, 2, 1. And it looks like we're starting over because that is an alien taking a man to be probed. Said the 3-year-old. Which makes me think maybe Mission Impossible was light. Like maybe that was okay. Whatever he's watching, no. Alright guys, you're all back in. Next up, is this A, President Donald Trump? B, a Yeti singing opera?
It's Oprah!
Or C,
it's Oprah!
Batman with a beard?
For the memes.
Where's Donald Trump?
Alright guys, A is over here, B is in the middle, C is right there. Make sure you're on the rug if you want A or C. That's money right there. Opera Yeti. Alright guys, 3 seconds to get your feet where you want them. 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. Okay, people without feet on rug, please back away from people with feet on rug so I can see where the line is here.
And put your shoes on, that's disgusting!
Yeah, it's a little bit unhygienic there. Okay, ready? On your marks, get set, be surprised, it's Batman with a beard. There we go. James, don't you be cheating like that. Get out of here, James. I saw that. That is lame. Alright. That one is all done, so we're going to switch over. Back up. Back up. Same kind of game. Why aren't you down the road? Can someone please tell me about that?
You guys are all just pushing me forward. Nope. What the heck?
options now. It's just going to be this rug versus that rug. That's all it is, okay? Is it a ladybug or is it a cat? Malachi? It is not a Malachi. Is it a ladybug or a cat? Pick your rug. You must choose! Ladybug? Cat. Pick a rug, Malachi. Pick a rug. 3, 2, 1. The middle means you lose. Alright, and the answer is a cat! You chose wisely. The rest of you lost.
It was trying to do the
Alright guys, new one right here. Look at that beautiful work of art. Isn't that lovely? Your options are saving baby Moses or a killer bee attack.
A killer bee attack. No.
Moses? Bees!
No, it's Moses.
Little bees. Is it Moses or bees?
Moses, you can see. Look.
Alright, and the answer is saving baby Moses! Bees, get out of here! Malachi, you're gone. You lost. It was not a killer bee attack. Hey, you know what? It's just a bad hair day for Moses, okay? Or maybe someone made him think that Moses has antenna. I don't know. Alright, here we go. Look at that work of art. Did you notice he actually stayed in the lines too? It's like this is clearly what he was going for. Is it bagpipes or a giraffe? Which is it? Alright, here we go. Bagpipe giraffe. It's bagpipes! Alright, final two. Final two. Here we go. Next drawing. Oh, that's lovely right there. That just makes me want to cry tears of something. Is it a flying larva monster? Not lava. That would be different. Larva or an alien turd? Malachi, it's time to go outside the circle. You've lost.
This is the house.
You can leave. I love you though. I still do. Okay, they're both going the flying larva monster. This could be a huge loss or a huge win. Who knows? It's a flying larva monster. I'm gonna give it to you both. You can both go have a donut. Everybody back in. Everybody back in. Oh my goodness. Just wow. Just wow. If you want a donut, come get in the circle. We're starting over. We're starting over. It's all 50-50 from now on.
It's so dark.
Is it Elmo jumping hurdles?
Stop cheating. That's not me.
Or Mickey Mouse picking flowers?
Mickey Mouse.
It's either Elmo jumping hurdles on this rug, or it's Mickey Mouse picking flowers on this rug.
Elmo.
Take your business to the rug of your choice.
My favorite.
James, get out.
Alright, here we go. The answer is James is where he's supposed to be, Malachi. You leave him alone. You just back right up. Alright, here we go. The answer is
Elmo.
Mickey Mouse picking flowers. Sorry, Elmo people, you have rejected yourself from the circle. And next up, it's like that thing. It's one of those.
That's rude.
Is it a maze or is it gravity? If it is a maze, I don't think I could do it. I think it's too hard for me. I think it's just from a 3-year-old, so QC isn't what it should be. Little lax there. All right, very few are going with a maze. But if you're in the middle, you must choose. 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1. And it is a maze! All the gravity voters are gone.
Why would 3-year-olds choose gravity?
Well, because reasons, obviously. Malachi, I'm sorry, man. Get out of here. Bye, Malachi. I love you. Okay, here we go. Next up, pregnant pony or cow jumping over the moon. Pregnant pony over here, cow jumping over the moon right here.
Pregnant pony, guys.
It's pretty tough. You can really go either way. Are those craters or an embryo? Which is it? And also, what is that?
I know.
The world may never know.
That's the stomach of a baby.
Alright, and the answer is pregnant pony! Well done. Well done. Alright, here we go. This is it, ladies and gentlemen. You've worked so hard for this moment. Is it a monkey or a frog? Because those are your two guesses. toes, weren't they? That's what you were thinking. You were thinking, well, that's clearly a monkey. Sorry, monkey, frog. Monkey, frog, what would it be? How many toes does a monkey have? Also, how many toes does a frog have? I mean, really. Abby's like, I got this. I got this. It's a frog! You both win! Go get a donut. Alright, I don't know how many we have left. We might be out. Oh, no, we got a good one. Look at that. It's a huge scene. There's so much going on. Look at all that action. You guys are all back in. You're all back in. Come on over. Join us for the donut
Attack on Titan.
stampede. Is it A, jumping on a trampoline, or B, ghosts chasing Scooby-Doo?
Wait, what? Where do I stand?
Where would
Trampoline.
Scooby-Doo? Here.
Scooby-Doo. Trampoline. Scooby-Doo.
Scooby-Doo, baby.
This is a wild one, ladies and gentlemen. It is a wild one. Here we go. The few versus the many, it would seem. The answer is ghosts chasing Scooby-Doo! Sorry, trampoliners, you're out of here.
I got it right. I'm Scooby-Doo!
Alright, and next up, that thing.
Oh, that's a portal.
Is it hamsters in a wheel or a doll's face?
That's a doll's face.
To which I say they need a new doll. That should not stand.
That's a doll's face, the eyes and the
Alright guys, hamsters in a wheel right over here. Doll's face right over there. Hamsters in a wheel, doll's face. And the answer is...
It's a doll's face.
A doll's face! The rest of you guys out of here! And this is why I've always said you need artists to stand there in the museum with you while you're looking at their art. I think interpreting it on your own is such a lost cause.
That looks exactly like
But that's just my opinion. Alright, here we go. This is like a real Pollock right here. This is fantastic. This deserves to go in a museum. They said this is the beautiful butterfly flapping its wings, or they said it's the beautiful peacock spreading its feathers. Butterfly, peacock. Such a serene sense of beauty and just a communicative sense of color. Just all that color being communicated. I love it. Alright, you guys all on this side, you're all on that side? Okay, here we go. The answer is peacock spreading out its feathers. Well done, you four. Malachi, you lost, you're out. Go.
You actually lost.
Banished. Well, then you double lost. You lost again. Alright, you four. Where's the fourth? There was a fourth, wasn't there? Oh, it was Caleb. Okay. Alright, next up is nothing. So all four of you win, you get a donut.
Yay!
A piece.
What, do I get a donut?
Alright, and once those four have gone,
Do I get a donut or something?
I want to open this up very specially. You ready? Okay. If you did not win these games, shh, I'm answering the question as we speak, but for everyone, Matt, go away. Go away. You were not asked to be on the stage.
Oh, I wasn't.
Alright, so if you did not win the picture guessing game at all, you didn't win any of the picture games, you may get a donut now.
Yes, I
If you didn't win any of the picture games, you may get a donut now. Okay? If you won any of the picture game rounds, don't get a donut yet. Thank you.
Did you win any of the picture guessing games?
One of them.
Then please wait your turn. That's all.
I'm already fat enough. I'm fat enough. I already ate a whole bowl of ice cream at my house. Because I can. What babe, I say 4 hours in the morning. Because I need to go to school. School is boring. I want to be considered something I enjoy.
Because she already had one from winning a round of the picture game.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I said if you...
Oh,
Did you...
I thought you meant like. I thought
Oh
you
no,
meant
like
just
everyone
like
got one of
your
those.
team.
No, if you didn't win any of the picture-related games, you can go have a donut. If you didn't win...
The carpet that I went on won, but then I got.
Oh, no, that'd be like everyone. Everyone won some
Okay,
guess.
so wait,
I mean
I
like
can
a
get a
final round
I
winner.
can get a donut.
Yeah, you can get a donut. Yeah, if you didn't win a donut from the picture game, now you can go have a donut. That was the gist of it. I should have added the donut bit. Okay, cool. And then everybody find a seat. It's time for the final topic of the evening. Evolution.
Can I get a leader to check hallway and bathroom? See how many have leaked away? And send them back this way.
Baby, my turtles. Baby.
Everybody find a seat! It's the last topic of the night, and then it's just all games after that till your parents arrive. Last topic. Hi Malachi, why are you up here again?
I couldn't walk home.
Nope. I'm currently using that one. It is in use. Pick a different one. Go pick a
I want
different
the
one.
one Maya's sitting in.
How about pick one no one's using?
How about no?
I call this one.
Malachi, why do you purposely
I call.
Oh, that was close. That was almost really bad. Malachi, you lucked out. Caleb, thank you for letting go.
Out of your
All right. Tonight, our final topic is evolution. It kind of ties all the rest of these together. It gets into the big timelines, the deep time. So first off, let's see what you guys said about evolution. Here's what you've heard. I've heard people say that we were once dolphins or something.
Human equal ape. I heard that in the movie Dolphin Tale.
Sure, that makes sense. Why not? I mean, honestly, if you got one ancient shared ancestor, why not have all the shared ancestors? That just makes sense, right? What else have we heard from people? We've heard ape equals human. I like that one. Apes are people too, man. We came from monkeys and fish. Not apes and fish, mind you, monkeys and fish. Which makes me wonder, are they just talking about like monkeys that have a diet of fish? Or like crossbreed of monkey fish? Like, where's the crossover here?
Monkey!
And then they've also heard, you guys have heard that there is no creator, and that humans have come from chimpanzees. No! I like that extra bold, all caps no. It was beautiful. Just beautiful. Alright guys, so evolution is a tricky topic. What is evolution? So I looked at 3 different definitions, and I love this about the word evolution. You can look in different places, and you can get such different definitions. Hunter, hands to yourself. Okay, good. Keep them to yourself. Anyone near Malachi in any realm? Anybody else in the room? Just keep your hands to yourself.
Yeah,
cool.
Just make sure
Thanks.
it's
What is evolution? So I found some different definitions just by looking at different places. Someone want to read the first one?
The process of by what? Oh, by
Go ahead, Matt. You can read it. It's fine. Yeah, go for it. Quiet, everybody. Matt's going to read the first definition. Go for it, Matt.
Matt, read!
I shouldn't have to shush you guys 7 times for the same thing.
The process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the, I don't know what
Earth.
Earth.
Anyone want to read number 2? Hunter, go for it.
The scientific theory explaining the appearance of new species and varieties through the action of various biological mechanisms.
Very nice. And then someone want to take number 3? Go for it.
No.
Yes. I don't care. One of you.
The gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form.
Okay. All right, so questions. Does anybody here think that a pastor would argue against these definitions, that like they're not true or it's a myth or whatever?
Yes.
Possibly.
How about this pastor? Just, because it's harder to pick on other people. That's like gossip
I mean, this
or
is
something.
basically
You guys can pick on me, though.
opposite of the Bible.
How about
All right, so check this out. First definition, the process by which different kinds of living organisms are thought to have developed and diversified from earlier forms during the history of the earth. I actually wouldn't argue with that one at all. I would say every word of that is carefully chosen, and I think it's true. I think that's really what's happened. I think it's still happening. Number 2, the scientific theory explaining the appearance of new species and varieties through the action of various biological mechanisms. It's also very carefully worded. I think it's true. I think that's always happened and it's still happening.
Really?
I don't argue against it at all, based on how it's worded right there.
I disagree.
Number 3, the gradual development of something, especially from a simple to a more complex form. Now that one is tricky.
Why is everyone taking off their
That one's tricky, because there are certain things that can change from simple to complex, but how does that happen? How does something go from simple to complex?
I shouldn't take off my shoes.
Just time, that's it? If I leave my Legos in a bucket in my room long enough, they will form a structure.
A structure called a mess.
Is that mess more or less complex?
Oh my goodness, I have a question.
It's very complex of how much.
Alright, same thing applied from Legos all the way to pond scum. If you leave pond scum in a pond long enough, does it turn anything besides pond scum?
Let me tell you the most.
Just more pond scum. Pond scum. Yeah.
So it has to be manipulated to change.
It doesn't have to be manipulated to change, or just, be alive. It could be alive and change. But the problem is when you say simple to complex, because simple to complex, by the definition of those words, that means there's like more information being poured into the thing. More intelligence, more structure, new ideas to go from simple to complex. So the question at the heart of the debate about evolution, the question at the heart of why people who are Christians frequently say, I don't believe in evolution, and I can stand here and say, well, I think it's real, I think it's happening, is because this one part is misunderstood. For some reason, evolutionary scientists seem to think that if you leave things alone long enough, just by interbreeding, right, just like organisms having babies, organisms multiplying, that all just from that one process, you will get more complicated organisms down the line just because they're having kids. That complications of good stuff are going to arise all by themselves. This is where I take issue. Obviously, you can interbreed things, you can hybridize things, you can take things of two similar kinds, breed them together, and get something new out the other side. Yadoy, that happens. That's how we got dogs. Dogs weren't always the breeds we have. We've actually had new breeds of dogs pop up within our lifetime. So clearly, you can change the DNA of something by carefully breeding it. But we don't have dogs with more DNA than we started with. Does that make sense? We don't have dogs with more DNA than we started with. You can breed them all you want. You can breed them for thousands of years. You don't get dogs with more DNA. You get dogs with the same amount of DNA, and just bits of it are different. So the question is, when do you make the leap from single-cell organism to multi-cell organism? When do you make the leap from banana to fruit fly? When do you make the leap from ape to human?
Oh, I know.
When their genomes are not the same length. They don't have the same amount of DNA. How do you cross those boundaries of things that can interbreed, right? So different kinds of dogs, horses and zebras, tigers and lions, those things that can interbreed. How do you cross that line over to something that it can't interbreed with? How do you make that happen? And the evolutionary answer is time. That's the evolutionary answer. With enough time, anything's possible. Even things we can't explain that don't make sense, that go against the evidence. Evolutionary science still says, just give it enough time and it'll happen all by itself. That's what I take issue with. Yeah?
So you're saying, basically, if we jump off a skyscraper, if time happens, then also sort of fly? Yes.
Nope,
yes,
no one was saying that, not even a little bit.
Yes.
Not even a little bit. So, I would say right up until simple to complex got mentioned, I like those definitions. I think those things happen. I think species change over time because of interbreeding, because of genetics. We've seen it so much, it's so well documented. Anyone who argues against species changing through genetic manipulation just from breeding is not really looking at the science. The problem is, you don't get to go from fruit fly to banana or the other way around. You don't get to go from single cell to multi-cell because of breeding. That doesn't explain it. That doesn't cover it. So, a few problems here. So, first off, all changes from one kind of living thing into another happen too slowly to ever be observed. This is part of the definition of evolutionary biology. That when you watch long enough, like longer than humans have been around, then you would see evolution happening.
No!
But since evolution is so slow, you can never see it happening. This means we've come up with a theory that we wrote into the definition, you can't test this.
Why not?
That's literally the definition of evolution. A thing that happens so slowly, you can't observe it. Well, if you can't observe it, it's really hard to test, and so that's part of the problem. All those transitions from banana to fruit fly, from ape to human, all those times where you're changing the amount of DNA cannot be repeated in a lab. Why? Because we don't have a mechanism for changing the length of a genome.
Oh, really?
Like, even in a lab with machines forcing things to happen, we still can't change the length of a genome. We can't make it happen. Not to mention nature, not to mention just happening randomly all by itself. That's never happened observedly, ever. We've never seen it happen. And we can't even make it happen with all the gene splicing and all the tech we've come up with. We still can't do it. So the claims of evolution, if we wanted to see, could you feasibly make a banana turn into a fruit fly? Could you make something evolve? We would love to try that, but you get into the lab, you look at the DNA, and sticking on an extra piece breaks it.
No.
The individual parts of the cell constantly double check your DNA, constantly, day and night, to see, is it still good?
No.
Is your DNA okay? Is there anything wrong? Are you sick?
So it's like
What's going on?
overprotective mother.
Cancer.
But it's in every cell of your body. And when things break down, you do get weird things like cancer, but that's kind of the point. Cancer can't be an answer to evolution because it kills the species, and the whole point of evolution is it has to live long enough to procreate. Anything that kills you is like a complete kill for evolution too. So yeah, we have no mutations that can add to the length of your DNA. We haven't found any. And then modern evolutionists ignore what Darwin already knew. He wrote this in his own book. He wrote this. He says that his theory could not explain, it does not explain, he didn't know how it could ever explain any complex part of life, like a part of your body, some little process, that was unable to be formed slowly by one piece at a time. So in his view, because remember, he was, from a long, long time ago, he didn't know all the stuff we know now about microbiology, about individual cells. He didn't know a lot of that stuff. He was saying that if we started to learn more and more, and we came across something that was so complex you couldn't build it up piece by piece, then it would undo his theory. His theory only works for things that can be built one piece at a time. We have those systems. We know about those systems. You'll probably learn about them in anatomy some year in the future in high school. There's the system of platelets helping you to form scabs and to stop your bleeding. Has anyone learned about that process?
No, because none of us are in high school.
Well, some people have learned it.
I have learned
that process has so many pieces that interact with each other. It's not just like a chain reaction like a fuse of not bleeding to death every time you get a cut. The process by which your body stops the bleeding by just forming like a scab. That simple process. To the naked eye, you know what it looks like? It looks like your blood dries. That's what it looks like, right? It looks like your blood just dries from air, and it makes a hard scab, and ta-da, I've stopped bleeding. Yay! Well, that's actually not what happens. If you leave blood out in the air, it doesn't form a scab all by itself. There's actually chemicals in your blood that have to interact with each other, notice that there is a cut, and then there's a chain reaction in multiple directions so that multiple components can all fly back and work at the same time to form a scab. And if any one piece of those goes wrong, two things can happen. And these are real diseases that people have. One is that when you get a cut, you don't stop bleeding. Your body won't form scabs, it refuses to. That's an actual disease that some people have. It's a birth defect. And they have to be incredibly careful for their whole life. If they ever need surgery, there's all these extra precautions you have to take. It's wild. The other side of that is clotting. If your blood sets off that chain reaction wrongfully, like it sets it off too easily, there is no cut, and you start forming a scab inside of a vein, guess what happens?
You die?
Suddenly your blood flow stops to whatever part of your body that vein's going to. You know, like the pins and needles sensation when you lay on your arm or whatever?
Oh my goodness,
just imagine if that never let up and like your arm just stopped getting blood. And then that's it. I have to now lop off my arm. So this system that keeps scabs forming is so carefully tuned, but it involves multiple working parts. I haven't studied it in a while. I think it's like 23 different parts, all working in a finely organized little clockwork manner, one setting off the next. It's not even a straight line reaction. It's multiple reactions branching and reconverging. It's wild. Any part of that goes wrong, you die. And if you die, you don't procreate.
Yes,
so there is no evolution.
Well, if you die, you're dead. Yes.
No. Yeah, Landon.
Well, I can't extend that because if you lose one of your... Oh, wait. They're talking.
They still are.
Oh, wait.
Go for it, Landon.
I heard that if you lose one of your body
parts?
Wait. Blood clotting? Things? Even one, you will continually bleed.
Yeah, like I was saying.
And that could kill you.
It's a real disease. It's very, very serious. And, you know, especially if you have it and don't know it, that's especially serious.
Yeah, because then you're not doing
You're not looking out, you're not being super careful.
You're not being like, oh,
Usually you figure out at a pretty young age. Okay, so how is evolution supposed to work? There's 4 mechanisms. You guys may have studied these already in school. 4 mechanisms that explain how evolution works. And I don't argue that these occur. I try and understand. I'm not anti-science. I know natural selection occurs. I know genetic drift occurs. I know hybridization is a real thing. I know mutations occur. I do not argue against any of these things existing or not existing. That's not the point. Okay, it really is just what they can and can't do. That's all I'm saying. So the first 3, natural selection, genetic drift, and hybridization, they don't add new information to a genome. All the scientists agree on this. Is not like Christians are the only ones. Like, no, they don't add new information. All they do is move information around. So natural selection says if you have a better trait than the other person, you live better, you live longer, you make more kids, whatever. Especially in the animal kingdom. Natural selection means good traits last longer, they come up in more of the species. Genetic drift is actually a mathematical explanation for how sometimes, occasionally, by weird circumstance, a worse trait can actually take over and beat out the good trait. And so you can have a weird backward spread of like bad trait spreading through a population of a species. And then hybridization is where you have one species has like stayed apart from the other species, part of the species, and like they start to diverge, they start to become different things, and then they come back together through like, river drying up or whatever, and now they start to have offspring, and it brings some of the genes from this group and some of the genes from that group together, like ligers and mules and those kinds of things. So that's hybridization. Tigans. So yeah, that's hybridization. All of those happen, but the thing is, none of them make new information. They're just moving the information around. That's all it is. Natural selection gets the good traits to come around. Genetic drift gets random traits to come around. Hybridization gets a bunch of traits to mix together, so you get new combinations. That's it. No new traits are coming from this. So you're never going to get a slug evolving a shell and turning into a snail from these 3, right? You're never going to get apes turning into humans from these 3. These 3 can't do that. They don't add anything to the equation. The 4th thing, and this is the only other force within evolution, is mutation. That's it. That's the only other force within mutation, or within evolution. So the first 3 add nothing. They move things. The 4th one is the only one that adds things. And truthfully, it doesn't add new information. It really garbles existing information. Information has a definition. Okay, so information means the careful arrangements of things to convey a message. And inside your genome is information. If you've ever watched like some sort of 3D simulation or ever seen that picture in your biology book, there are some cool parts in your cells that take the DNA, read off a part of it, copy it, stick it together with bits of protein, form a big long protein chain, jam it into a ribosome, crumple it all up and fold it till it turns into like a useful tool. A microscopic hammer with a fin, or a drill with a bearing in the middle. I mean, like actual machines made out of protein. They are wild and cool, and your cells are making them all the time. It's so cool. That's what your DNA does. And inside your DNA is the blueprint. It's literally a list. I need this protein, and then that protein, and then this protein, and then that protein, and then that one, and then that one, and then that one. And if you get them in the right order, you get a tool. You get the hammer with a flipper on it. You get the spiral drill with a bearing. You get those tools. And if you mess up the ingredients list,
you die.
You don't get your useful tool. Because when the folding occurs, it's like worse than origami. It's a crazy amount of folding. And every protein means it folds in a different way. And if you get just one thing wrong in the middle of that protein chain, then the whole shape of the object has changed. Every part of that object is now folded the wrong way from that part on. Everything after that in the chain
upside down.
Is upside down or at a right angle or running into another piece of the same protein. Like one little change has a huge set of consequences. And so when things mutate, usually the results are bad. Most mutations have a bad consequence. It will hurt you. And so God actually designed your cells to fight this. Your cells actually have error checking built in to see if it knows it doesn't seem right. And part of this actually happens right at conception with a comparison of your parents' DNA on both sides and just seeing, does one do the other? Does one seem better than the other? And that's the one that will become an active gene in you.
Okay, Toby.
Other parts of your genome are just like not that important, and your body's just like, flip a coin, take whichever one I feel like. And then still, you can also have parents that both have the same bad mutation.
Ew, that's
Each
disgusting.
parent has that one gene flipped the wrong way, and now you get it from both sides, and your body's like, well, I know this seems wrong, but like, I don't have a reference. I don't have another copy of a good one. I'm just gonna have to use it. And that means you'll probably have some deformity, and sometimes it's really small. Sometimes it's like nothing big at all. You know, extra flange of skin connecting your gums to your lip that you really don't need. It'll be, my ear on this side is flat and my ear on this side sticks out. It'll be something really isn't meaningful. But there are some that are really interesting. So there was one family, and it became a dominant gene, and so it was passed down kid to kid to kid to kid to kid. And they figured it out because one kid couldn't swim.
Bruh.
He couldn't swim. He would get in the pool and he'd sink to the bottom. And he'd try and he couldn't float. So he could only go in the 3-foot deep part of the pool. He just could not swim. And they thought he was playing them, or was scared, or was making up excuses. So he has this checked out. Turns out his bones are oddly dense. Incredibly dense. Because typically human bones have a lot of I don't know if it's actually air, but there's a bunch of empty space, right? There's a bunch of empty space in the outside parts of most human bones. And you check his bones on an x-ray, he doesn't. His bones are solid bone. There's no pockets and holes. There's nothing. Solid bone.
He must be really heavy to lift up.
Well, for his size, yeah, he's denser than most people. So they check into his family history. You keep going up the male side of his family, and no one has ever broken a bone in their whole life.
Bruh, how you do that?
All the way up as far back as they have records. No one remembers anyone on the male side of his family ever breaking a bone ever.
What about the
And he's like, that's so cool. And then he realizes, but wait, I can't swim. So the mutation seems good. It's sweet, now we're invincible. We don't get broken bones, but also you go in a river and you're dead. You sink right to the bottom. So there is no mutation that's just better. There's no mutation we've ever found that just means, okay, suddenly you are the superhuman. You can rule us all. You have powers beyond comprehension.
But now you can't swim.
But also you can't swim. We've never found one that comes with no cost. We've never found one that comes with no downside. Yeah.
Does that mean he will never break a bone?
Probably. Maybe he could do something extreme enough to break it.
Crash.
I'm sure if he tried, or he got into some crazy car crash with a semi-truck or something, but at least in the guys in his family, it's never happened. Anything they've done was a small enough fall that dense bones survived it. So this is it though. This is the last hope for evolution, is mutations. If mutations can't add length to the genome, then there's nothing in evolution that can explain that. Does that make sense? There's nothing else there that can add changes in the DNA that are fresh and new and unique, except for mutation. And it's never been able to add to the length of the genome. So if you start out with that first cell that somehow just crazy random happenstance came into being, was alive, and it has its tiny little random chance genome, there is no known mechanism we've ever found. We can't even force it to grow some DNA a little bit longer and become something greater.
Don't do that.
There's no mechanism. So far the evolutionary theory is incomplete. That's kind of the point. Is that even if someday someone does find it, right now the thing they're teaching everyone in school is a broken, incomplete theory, and that's not how they teach it. They don't teach it as the theory that's almost good, or the theory that almost makes sense. They teach it as the theory that everyone should believe, everyone should trust, everyone should follow. This is it. This is how we do science. But the truth is, they don't have a way to explain this.
Then why do they teach it?
Because
it's the most
they don't want it to be the other thing. The other thing is that there is a God. The other thing is that God is real, that what he said is true, and at some point when you die, you're going to have to face up to that. But if you can come up with something to believe in that doesn't involve God, if you can come up with something to believe in that says, no, there's nothing after you die, it's just nothing, well then, you don't have to fear. Whatever you do in this life, it's just you. You and your consequences is all you got to deal with. There's no judge. There's no ultimate consequences. There's nothing after this you have to worry about. But interestingly, God already knew you'd be worried about it. He already knew you'd be worried about death. He knew that. So he sent his son to die in your place. And he says, put your faith in him. Your sins are forgiven. The afterlife, not a worry anymore. Suddenly, you can actually find hope in what comes after this. Because you can actually be looking forward to perfection. You can be looking forward to heaven rather than nothing. See, that's the interesting thing. A lot of people accept evolution, reject God because they don't like hell. They don't like consequences. But God didn't say it's nothing or it's hell. He said it's your made-up worldview or it's me and my grace. And then he paid the price. He sent his son to die on the cross in our place. He's not putting you in between nothing and hell. He's saying, follow after me, and you can have eternal perfection. You can have forgiveness. You can have grace. Yeah,
Are we
Peach.
almost done?
Wow, thanks. Thanks, Peach. This is
I think they're
perfectly timed. All right, guys. We're going to pray, and then we're going to go downstairs and play our last game.
Whoa.
So this time, when parents roll in the front door, it's not like some weird stampede to try and make it there in time.
Daniel, we actually got done early.
Oh, no. I know. Thank you. Hold your applause. So let's pray. I'm hoping I don't need a microphone.
I can't hear you.
Thanks, Matt. Let's pray.
Sorry.
It's okay. Lord, we just thank you that you've put the truth out there for us. That we don't have to just search in the void, but you've actually compiled it in your word. Thank you, Lord, for that you've made it accessible. You've preserved it after all these thousands of years from when it was first written. Help us, Lord, to not only trust in it, but, Lord, to really trust you. To trust that you haven't left us here to figure things out all by ourselves. To trust that man does not always have all the answers. To trust that asking questions is not going to get us stuck. It's not going to leave us wondering. Thank you, Lord, that we can ask questions and get real answers. So help us, Lord. Help everyone in this room to continue to ask those hard questions. To never let up. To never just shrug and say, well, that's what they believe. Help us, Lord, to be the people who are seeking real truth. And not just things that I say, Lord, but real truth, things that you say, because I get things wrong sometimes. So bless these kids with wisdom tonight. Bless them with knowledge, Lord. But most of all, Lord, I hope you'll bless them with some knowledge of you. Help them to get to know you. With their heads all bowed, with their eyes all closed, if there's anyone here tonight that would like to know God in a brand new way, maybe you've never before said to him, I want to follow you. You never before said, I want to be part of your family. Or the really big step said, Jesus, I believe in you. I want forgiveness. If you've never done that before, but you want to do it tonight, this isn't a challenge. I'm not trying to, make you do this in front of people so there's peer pressure. I really want this to be private. That's why I ask everyone to close their eyes. It's just so you guys have a chance to say this just between you and God. You can say to him, I want to follow you. I want your forgiveness. I want to be part of your family. But I'm going to ask you to raise your hand. Because God can see your heart, and he knows. He absolutely knows, but I don't. I can't see your heart. I can guess. But if you raise your hand, I'll pray with you. I'll help you with the words. You can talk to God. And you can ask him for that forgiveness. You can ask to become part of his family. And so if you want to do that right now, just put up your hand. It could be a shy, quick hand. It could be a bold, high in the air hand. Doesn't matter. Whatever the case is, I'll try my best to catch it. But if you want to pray right now and talk to him, ask for all those things I mentioned, you can put your hand up. I see that hand. Anyone else tonight? I see that hand. You can put that one down. Anyone else? All right, well, you who raised your hands, and anyone else, maybe you're too shy to put your hand up. That's okay. Telling me you want to do this is not a prerequisite of doing it. So if you're too shy to put your hand up, that's okay. You can pray with us anyways. You can put your faith in God right now. But if you put your hand up, just pray these words after me. Say them in your heart. And realize it's not the words that make the difference. It's really your faith. It's your belief. There's no magic sequence of words. So just repeat these words, and as long as you mean them, then that's it. This closes the deal. You've put your trust into him. He'll offer you forgiveness. So here we go. Repeat these words. Dear Jesus, thank you for taking my punishment. Thank you for dying in my place.
believe you died, but also that you rose again. You conquered death. Conquer it for me too. Save me. Forgive me. Take away my every sin. Everything I've ever done wrong, and everything I ever will do wrong. Make me clean. Make me pure, Jesus, so I can be like you. Fill me with your Holy Spirit. Use it to guide me, to show me how to live for you. And when I die, take me into your kingdom so I can live with you in heaven forever. Thank you, Jesus. I pray all this in your name. Amen. Right on. Well, you guys who raised your hands, or anybody else who prayed that, maybe you prayed it without raising your hand, that's totally fine. I encourage you to talk to me or a Christian you know. Someone who can answer your questions. Because I'm betting if this is really the first time for you, you've never prayed that sometime in the past, or maybe church isn't like a regular deal for you, you've got questions. And maybe you haven't thought of all of them yet. But I want to make sure you guys get on the right track. If you don't have a Bible at home that you know how to read, talk to me. I want to get you an easy reading Bible.